In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets whisper behind lace curtains, young heiress Sylvia Hawthorne vanishes from Thornfield Hall, leaving only a monogrammed scarf and a trail of lies. Was she kidnapped, or is she hiding from a darker truth? Miss Jane Marple, armed with her knitting needles and a razor-sharp understanding of human nature, uncovers a web of embezzlement, blackmail, and buried clues, lockets, coded diaries, and hidden rooms that point to the charming but sinister Julian Tarrant and his shadowy ally, Felix Marsh. As stolen jewels and threatening notes surface, can Miss Marple unravel the scandal before the culprits escape justice? Or will Sylvia's fate remain a mystery forever? Chapter 1. The Vanished Heiress. The morning sun spilled golden light over the cobblestone lanes of St. Mary Mead, painting the village in a gentle glow that belied its restless undercurrents. Roses climbed the trellises of quaint cottages, and the air carried the faint sweetness of honeysuckle, but beneath this pastoral serenity, whispers of scandal stirred. At the heart of the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite corner of Mrs. Langley's tea shop, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the hum of gossip around her. The shop, with its lace curtains and mismatched china, was the unofficial pulse of St. Mary Mead, where every murmur found an eager ear. Miss Marple's fingers, nimble despite their years, wove soft wool into a scarf as her sharp eyes scanned the room. She wore her usual attire, a tweed skirt, a pale blue cardigan, and a string of pearls that gleamed softly against her collar. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster indulging in a quiet pastime, but those who knew her understood that her mind was as keen as her needles, threading together the village's secrets with unerring precision. Today, the tea shop buzzed with a single topic: the disappearance of Sylvia Hawthorne, the young heiress of Thornfield Hall. Sylvia, barely 22, with chestnut curls and a laugh that once echoed through the village green, had vanished a month ago without a trace. Her guardian, Mr. Julian Tarrant, a man whose charm was as polished as his cufflinks, insisted she had eloped with a suitor no one could name. But the villagers, ever skeptical of outsiders, suspected darker truths. She was too proper for such. Nonsense, Mrs. Langley declared, setting down a tray of scones with a thud. Her apron strained against her ample frame as she leaned over the counter, her voice low but carrying. Sylvia wouldn't run off without a word. Not with that fortune of hers, mark my words, there's mischief afoot. Miss Marple's needles paused, her pale blue eyes lifting to meet Mrs. Langley's. People do act out of character when pressed, she murmured, her tone mild but laced with curiosity, though Sylvia always seemed a sensible girl. Perhaps Mr. Tarrant knows more than he shares. Across the room, a cluster of women huddled over their teacups, their voices a conspiratorial hum. They say, "Thornfield Hall's been too quiet," whispered Mrs. Pemberley, her hat adorned with a garish peacock feather. "No visitors, no parties not like when old Mr. Hawthorne was alive, and that Tarrant always smiling like he's selling." "You something," her companion, Miss Clara Finch, nodded vigorously, her spectacles slipping down her nose. "And what about that maid, Ellen Ward, skittish as a cat in a storm? I saw her yesterday, clutching a scarf like it was her lifeline. Dropped it right outside the shop, she did." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, though her expression remained serene. Ellen Ward. The name conjured an image of a slight, pale girl with darting eyes, always hovering at the edges of Thornfield Hall's grand rooms. Miss Marple had noticed her before, serving tea with trembling hands at the last village fete. dropped scarf was a small thing, but small things, she knew, often unraveled larger secrets, as if summoned by the gossip. The bell above the door jingled, and Ellen Ward herself slipped into the tea shop. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a plain bonnet, and her grey dress hung loosely, as though she wished to disappear into it. In her hands she clutched a basket of baked goods, likely an errand for Thornfield Hall, but it was the scarf dangling from her fingers that caught Miss Marple's attention, a delicate silk piece, pale green, with the initials S.H. embroidered. In gold thread, Ellen's eyes flickered nervously as she approached the counter, handing Mrs. Langley a list. "Just the usual order, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The scarf slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. Mrs. Langley didn't notice, too busy scribbling the order, but Miss Marple's hands stilled. She watched as Ellen froze, her cheeks flushing, before stooping to retrieve the scarf with a haste that bordered on panic. The girl's fingers trembled as she tucked it into her basket, her eyes darting to see if anyone had noticed. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. She had noticed, and she knew, with the quiet certainty of long experience, that fear like Ellen's was rarely without cause. People dropped things all the time, handkerchiefs, coins, dignity, but they didn't guard them with such desperation, unless they held a secret. The tea shop's chatter resumed, oblivious to the small drama. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind weaving a different pattern. Sylvia Hawthorne's initials on a scarf in Ellen's possession could mean many things: a gift, a theft, a message, or perhaps Sylvia had left it behind, a breadcrumb in a trail gone cold. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Thornfield Hall, its ivor-clad walls looming over the village like a silent sentinel. She had visited once, years ago, when Sylvia's father was alive. The hall had been alive then, filled with music and laughter. Now it stood hushed, its secrets locked behind shuttered windows. As Ellen hurried out, the bell chiming her exit, Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and approached the counter. "Mrs. Langley," she said brightly, "I believe that young Ellen dropped something earlier. A scarf, perhaps. I'd hate for it to be lost." Mrs. Langley's eyebrows shot up. "Scarf? Why, yes. I saw her fussing with one. Green, wasn't it? Fancy thing for a maid. You think it's hers?" Miss Marple's smile was non-committal. "One never knows. I'll pop by Thornfield Hall and return it. No trouble at all." The walk to Thornfield Hall was pleasant, the late summer air warm and fragrant with cut grass. The hall stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its stone facade grand but weathered, as though it, too, mourned its missing mistress. Miss Marple's sensible shoes crunched along the gravel drive, her eyes noting the overgrown rose bushes and the curtains drawn tight against the windows. A house in mourning, she thought, or a house with something to hide at the door. She rang the bell, its chime echoing faintly within. After a moment, Ellen appeared, her face paling at the sight of Miss Marple. "Miss Marple," she stammered, what brings you here?" Miss Marple held up the scarf, now retrieved from her bag, its initials catching the light. "You dropped this at the tea shop, my dear. I thought it best to return it." Ellen's eyes widened, her hands fluttering to her apron. "Oh, I thank you. It's not mine, exactly. I was just holding it for someone with the initials S.H., perhaps." Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her gaze was steady, pinning Ellen like a butterfly to a board. The girl's lips parted, but no words came. Her fingers twisted the scarf, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. But then a shadow fell across the doorway, and a smooth voice interrupted. "Miss Marple, what a delightful surprise!" Julian Tarrant stepped forward, his smile as polished as ever. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with dark hair swept back and a suit tailored to perfection. His eyes, however, held a glint of wariness, like a fox scenting danger. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Miss Marple's smile matched his, though hers carried the warmth of genuine curiosity. "Just returning a lost item to Ellen," she said, handing the scarf to the maid, who took it with a murmured thanks and scurried away. "I hear you're hosting a memorial gathering for Sylvia tomorrow evening. A kind gesture, considering the uncertainty." Tarrant's smile tightened just a fraction. "Yes, well, it's been a month, and the village deserves some closure. Sylvia was impulsive, but dearly loved. I'm sure she'd want us to remember her fondly." "Impulsive," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. "An interesting choice of word. I always found Sylvia rather deliberate in her actions. But then, I only knew her from a distance." Tarrant's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained smooth. "Of course, you're welcome to join us tomorrow, Miss Marple. Your presence would be a comfort to the village." "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, her smile serene but her mind racing. Tarrant's charm was a well-oiled machine, but machines, she knew, could hide rust beneath their shine. As she walked back to St. Mary Mead, the scarf's initials lingered in her thoughts. Ellen's fear, Tarrant's guarded courtesy, the village's whispers, they were threads in a tapestry she could not yet see. But Miss Marple was patient. She had unravelled knottier mysteries than this. Armed with nothing but her knitting and a lifetime of observing human nature, back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, her needles resuming their dance. The memorial gathering would be a stage, she decided, where masks might slip and secrets might spill. Sylvia Hawthorne was out there live, or otherwise, and Miss Marple would find her. The scarf was a clue, Ellen a key, and Tarrant a puzzle. As the fire crackled, she smiled faintly, her mind already weaving the next thread in the mystery of the vanished heiress. Chapter 2. Echoes at the hall. The late afternoon sun cast golden ribbons across the manicured lawns of Thornfield Hall, its ivy-clad stone walls glowing with an almost deceptive warmth. The grand estate, nestled on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, stood as a monument to the Hawthorne family's faded opulence, its tall windows reflecting the fleeting light like watchful eyes. Inside, the air buzzed with the low hum of voices, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of polite laughter as guests milled about for Sylvia Hawthorne's memorial gathering. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a her-backed chair near the fireplace, let her sharp eyes roam the room, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. To the untrained observer, she was merely a frail, silver-haired spinster, her lavender shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, but her mind was a steel trap, catching every fleeting glance, every whispered word, every shadow of unease that flickered across the faces of those present. The hall's drawing room was a study in contrasts. Polished mahogany tables gleamed under crystal chandeliers, yet the air carried a faint mustiness, as if the house itself mourned its missing heiress. Sylvia Hawthorne, the young woman whose absence had drawn this crowd, was the subject of every conversation, though few spoke her name directly. Instead, they traded euphemisms, the poor dear, that unfortunate business, as if naming her might summon her ghost. Miss Marple, however, had no patience for such delicacy. Sylvia had vanished a month ago, and the official story, peddled by her guardian, Mr. Julian Tarrant, was that she had eloped with an unknown suitor. The villagers, ever fond of gossip, weren't convinced, and neither was Miss Marple. Her encounter with Ellen Ward, the nervous maid who dropped a monogrammed scarf marked S.H. at the tea shop, had only sharpened her suspicions. Ellen's frightened eyes and trembling hands had told a story of their own, one Miss Marple intended to unravel. Now, as she sat among the mourners, Miss Marple observed Tarrant working the room with the ease of a seasoned actor. He was a tall man, perhaps in his early 40s, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that seemed to promise secrets. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his cufflinks glinting as he gestured expansively to a cluster of guests. Sylvia would have loved this, he said loudly, his voice carrying a practiced warmth. She was always so fond of gatherings, wasn't she? The guests nodded, though their smiles were tight, their eyes darting to one another as if seeking confirmation. Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. Tarrant's charm was a veneer, she thought, like polish on chipped wood. He was too composed, too eager to steer the narrative. At the far end of the room, Ellen Ward moved silently among the guests, her tray of sherry glasses trembling slightly in her hands. Her plain black dress and white apron marked her as part of the staff, but her pale face and downcast eyes made her stand out. Miss Marple noted how Ellen avoided Tarrant's gaze, her movements jerky whenever he drew near. Interesting, she thought, resuming her knitting. A maid who fears her employer has either seen too much or knows too little. Either way, Ellen was a thread to tug. The gathering was a curious mix of St. Mary Mead's residents and a few outsiders, all drawn by curiosity or obligation. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple's old friend, stood near a towering floral arrangement, her cheeks flushed from her second glass of sherry. "It's all so theatrical, isn't it, Jane?" she whispered, leaning close. "This memorial business feels like a stage play, with Tarrant as the leading man. I half expect Sylvia to pop out from behind a curtain and declare it all a jest." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People often perform when they're hiding something, Dolly. And this room is full of performances." Her eyes flicked to a portly man in a tweed suit, Mr. Percy Gale, the local solicitor, who was holding court near the grand piano. His voice, loud and self-important, carried over the murmur of the crowd. Sylvia's inheritance was no small matter. Gale was saying to a group of attentive listeners, including a deer-faced woman in a peacock blue hat, "The Hawthorne Trust is worth a fortune, land, stocks, even a few overseas investments. It's all tied up in legal knots, of course, but whoever controls it." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Money, she thought, was always a motive, and Gale's loose tongue had just confirmed the stakes. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, the polite chatter giving way to an undercurrent of tension. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never still. She noticed a young woman, Miss Clara Henshaw, a distant cousin of Sylvia's, hovering near a glass case that displayed a collection of Hawthorne family heirlooms. The case held a silver locket, its surface engraved with the initials S.H. Clara, a mousy girl with round spectacles, seemed transfixed by it, her fingers twitching as if she longed to touch it. Miss Marple made a mental note. Clara's interest was more than sentimental, she suspected. Then a sudden commotion broke the hum of conversation. "It's gone," Mrs. Langley, the vicar's wife, gasped, pointing at the glass case. The crowd turned as one, their voices rising in a chorus of shock. The silver locket, the centerpiece of the display, had vanished. Tarrant was at the case in an instant, his face a mask of concern. Now, let's not jump to conclusions," he said, raising his hands for calm. "It's likely been misplaced. Ellen, have you seen it?" Ellen, who had been refilling a tray of biscuits, froze, her eyes wide. "No, sir," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I haven't touched it." The accusation hung in the air, and Miss Marple saw Ellen's hands clench around the tray, her knuckles white. The poor girl was terrified, but not, Miss Marple thought, of being caught stealing. No, Ellen's fear was deeper, rooted in something or someone else. The guests began murmuring, their eyes darting to Ellen, to Tarrant, to the empty case. "It's an outrage," Mrs. Langley declared, her peacock blue hat bobbing indignantly. That locket was Sylvia's pride and joy. Who would dare? "Perhaps it was a mistake," Miss Marple interjected softly, her voice cutting through the din like a gentle breeze. All eyes turned to her, and she smiled placidly, her needles never pausing. "Things are often misplaced at gatherings like this. People move about, they brush against things. Shall we look around before we assume the worst?" Her suggestion, delivered with the calm authority of a village matriarch, seemed to deflate the rising panic. Tarrant seized the opportunity. "Quite right, Miss Marple. Let's search the room. It can't have gone far." The guests fanned out, peering under tables, lifting cushions, and checking corners. Miss Marple, however, remained seated, her eyes fixed on the crowd. A theft, she thought, was a perfect distraction, and distractions were often orchestrated. She recalled a similar incident years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a stolen brooch had diverted attention from a forged will. The locket's disappearance felt deliberate, a sleight of hand to shift focus from something else. As the search continued, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the French doors leading to the garden. The evening light had faded, and the glass reflected the room's flickering candles. But beyond, the garden lay in shadow, its paths winding into darkness. She made a mental note to explore it later. Gardens, she knew, held secrets as often as drawing rooms did. Found it. Clara Henshaw's voice rang out, and the crowd turned to see her holding the locket aloft, her face flushed with triumph. It was caught in Mrs. Bantry's shawl, of all places. She pointed to a fringed shawl draped over a chair, and Mrs. Bantry gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Good heavens, how did it get there?" Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, hurrying over. "I swear I didn't touch it." "Of course you didn't, Dolly," Miss Marple said soothingly, though her mind was racing. The shawl had been nowhere near the glass case earlier. She was certain of it. Someone had placed the locket there, but why? To embarrass Mrs. Bantry? To deflect suspicion from themselves? Or to ensure the locket was found quickly, before a thorough search could uncover something else? Tarrant stepped forward, taking the locket from Clara with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A simple mix-up," he declared, holding it up, "for all to see. No harm done. Let's return it to its place and enjoy the evening." The guests murmured their agreement, relieved to move past the awkward moment, but Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. The locket's brief disappearance had served a purpose, she was sure, and she intended to find out what dot. As the gathering resumed, Miss Marple slipped away from the drawing room, her knitting tucked into her bag. She stepped through the French doors into the garden, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the stuffy warmth inside. The gravel path crunched under her sensible shoes as she moved toward a cluster of rose bushes. their petals ghostly in the moonlight. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but her instincts told her the garden held answers the drawing room did not. Near a stone bench, she paused, her eyes catching a glint of something half buried in the soil. Kneeling carefully, she was not as spry as she once was. She brushed away the dirt to reveal a torn photograph, its edges frayed. She held it up to the faint light spilling from the house. The image showed Sylvia Hawthorne, her auburn hair unmistakable, laughing as she stood beside a man whose face was partially torn away. The man's arm was around Sylvia's waist, and his posture suggested familiarity, perhaps affection. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A lover, a confidant, or someone more dangerous. She tucked the photograph into her pocket, her mind turning over the possibilities. The locket's theft had been a distraction, she was certain, but from what? The photograph's presence in the garden suggested someone had discarded it in haste, perhaps during the commotion. She thought of Ellen's trembling hands, Tarrant's calculated charm, Clara's fixation on the locket. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her expression serene but her thoughts anything but. The locket was back in its case, the guests were sipping their sherry, and Tarrant was laughing at something Mr. Gale had said. Yet the air felt charged, as if the hall itself were holding its breath. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a metronome to her racing thoughts. Sylvia Hawthorne was alive, she felt certain, or at least had been recently. The photograph was proof of that, and the man beside her was a key to her disappearance. She would keep the photograph hidden for now, she decided, until she could identify the man and his role in Sylvia's story. As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple bid her farewells, her smile as gentle as ever. "Such a lovely gathering, Mr. Tarrant," she said, her eyes meeting his. Sylvia would have been touched. Tarrant's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, bowing his head. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Your presence means a great deal." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Good, she thought. Let him wonder what I know, as she walked home through the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. The photograph felt heavy. In her pocket, a silent promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. The locket's brief disappearance had been resolved, but the mystery of Sylvia Hawthorne was only beginning to unfold. Miss Marple's steps were slow but purposeful, her mind already planning her next move. The man in the photograph, the nervous maid, the charming guardian, each was a thread in the tapestry of deceit, and she would pull them one by one until the truth lay bare. Chapter 3. The stranger in the night. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its pale light threading through the gnarled branches of the ancient oaks that fringed Thornfield Hall. The village, usually tucked into a quiet slumber by 10 o'clock, seemed to hold its breath tonight, as if it sensed the secret stirring in the shadows. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. The memorial gathering at Thornfield Hall earlier that day had left her mind buzzing, not with the polite chatter of the guests, but with the undercurrents of unease that rippled beneath their smiles. Ellen Ward, the nervous maid, had been a focal point. Her trembling hands, her darting eyes, and that monogrammed scarf marked S.H. still lingered in Miss Marple's mind. There was something Ellen wasn't saying, and Miss Marple's years of observing human nature told her. It was no small thing. She glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, 11:30. The village was silent, save for the occasional hoot of an owl. Most would be asleep, But Miss Marple, ever attuned to the pulse of St. Mary Mead, felt a restlessness she couldn't ignore. She set her knitting aside, slipped on her sturdy shoes, and draped a dark shawl over her shoulders. A walk, she decided, might clear her mind or, perhaps, reveal something more. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses. Miss Marple moved quietly along the lane, her steps light but purposeful, her eyes scanning the darkness. Thornfield Hall loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the servants' quarters. She paused at the edge of the estate's orchard, where apple trees stood in orderly rows, their fruit gleaming like silver orbs in the moonlight. It was here, among the shadows, that she heard a soft crunch of gravel, followed by a hushed voice. Miss Marple pressed herself against the rough bark of an apple tree, her heart steady but her senses sharp. Two figures stood near the orchard's far edge, their outlines blurred by the night. One was unmistakably Ellen Ward, her slight frame hunched, her voice low and urgent. The other was taller, cloaked in a long coat, their face obscured by a hat pulled low. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching only fragments of their conversation. "Sylvia's diary," Ellen whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not safe anymore." The stranger's reply was too soft to catch, but their posture tense, leaning forwards, suggested urgency. Miss Marple's mind raced. Sylvia's diary. The missing heiress had left behind more than a scarf and a locket, it seemed. Diaries held secrets, and secrets, in Miss Marple's experience, were often the key to unraveling mysteries. She edged closer, careful not to rustle the fallen leaves beneath her feet. "You don't understand," Ellen said, louder now, her voice cracking. "If he finds it, he'll know I took it." "He'll quiet," the stranger hissed, their voice a low growl. "You've done enough. Leave it to me now." Miss Marple's breath caught. He, who was Ellen so afraid of. Julian Tarrant, Sylvia's guardian, with his polished charm and two perfect smiles, or someone else entirely. The stranger turned, as if sensing a presence, and Miss Marple ducked lower, her heart giving a small, uncharacteristic lurch. The stranger muttered something, then slipped into the darkness, leaving Ellen alone. The maid stood frozen for a moment, her hands twisting together, before hurrying back toward the hall. Miss Marple waited, counting to 10 in her mind, then followed the stranger's path. The orchard gave way to a narrow trail that wound toward the estate's boundary wall. The stranger was gone, swallowed by the night. But something caught Miss Marple's ardor, small, dark bundle tucked beneath a gnarled root. She knelt, her fingers brushing the damp earth, and retrieved it. A notebook, its leather cover worn but intact, tied shut with a thin cord. She didn't open it, not here, not yet. Tucking it into her shawl, she made her way back to her cottage, her mind alight with possibilities. The next morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with a different kind of energy. Inspector Lyle, a stocky man with a nonsense air, had arrived from the county station, his motor car parked conspicuously outside the village post office. Word had spread that he was investigating rumours of Sylvia Hawthorne's trust being mismanaged, a scandal that set tongues wagging at the bakery and the butcher's. Miss Marple, sipping tea at Mrs. Langley's tea shop, listened as the villagers speculated. "Tarrant's been spending like a lord," old Mr. Phipps muttered, slicing his scone with deliberate care. That trust was meant for Sylvia, not his fancy suits. Mrs. Langley, wiping down the counter, leaned in, and Ellen Ward's been jumpy as a cat. Saw her yesterday, pale as a ghost, dropping a tray of cups when someone mentioned Sylvia. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes on her teacup. Ellen's fear was no surprise, not after last night. The notebook, now hidden in a biscuit tin in her cottage, weighed heavily on her mind. She finished her tea, left a few coins on the table, and made her way to the post office, where Inspector Lyle was speaking with the postmaster. "Good morning, Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice mild but her eyes sharp. "I trust you're settling into our little village." Lyle turned, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Marple, isn't it? I've heard you've a knack for noticing things others miss." "Oh, I'm just an old spinster with too much time on her hands," she said, her smile disarming. "But I did find something curious last night, near Thornfield Hall's orchard, in fact." Lyle's eyebrows rose. "Curious, you say?" She produced the notebook, still tied shut, and handed it to him. "It may be nothing, but I thought you might find it illuminating." Lyle took it, his fingers tracing the worn leather. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Under a tree." "Half buried," she said, her tone light. "I couldn't help but overhear a conversation last night. Lon Ward, the maid, was speaking with someone about a diary. I suspect this might be it." Lyle's eyes narrowed, but there was a glint of respect in them. "You're a sharp one. Miss Marple, I'll have a look at this. Could be important." "Indeed," she said, adjusting her shawl. "And perhaps you might ask Ellen why she was so keen to hide it." By afternoon, Miss Marple was back at Thornfield Hall, invited by Mrs. Dolly Bantry for a quiet lunch. The hall's grandeur was undeniable: polished oak floors, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced hawthorns glaring down from the walls. But there was a chill in the air, a sense of something amiss. Mrs. Bantry, ever the gossip, was in fine form, her eyes sparkling as she leaned across the dining table. "Jane, you'll never guess what I heard," she said, slicing into a roast pheasant. "That solicitor, Percy Gale, says Sylvia's trust is worth a fortune, millions, tied up in investments. But there's talk some of it's gone missing, and Julian Tarrant's been buying racehorses, of all things." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "People do get careless with other people's money, don't they?" Mrs. Bantry laughed, but her laughter faded as Ellen entered, carrying a tray of tea. The maid's hands shook slightly, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes darted to the window, as if expecting someone or something to appear. "Ellen dear," Miss Marple said gently, "you look troubled. Is everything all right?" Ellen froze, nearly dropping the tray. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's nothing. Just tired, that's all." But her voice betrayed her, and Miss Marple's kind smile held a knowing edge. "If you're ever in need of a friend, my cottage is always open." Ellen nodded, her lips tight, and hurried from the room. Mrs. Bantry raised an eyebrow. "She's been like that for weeks. Ever since Sylvia vanished." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the notebook, Ellen's fear, and the shadowy stranger. "Some secrets," she said softly, "are heavier than others." That evening, Inspector Lyle visited Miss Marple's cottage, the notebook in hand. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room, but Lyle's face was grim. "It's Sylvia's diary, all right," he said, settling into a chair. "Coded, though, strange symbols, not words. I've got a man at the station working on it, but it'll take time." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking. "And Ellen, did you speak with her?" Lyle sighed. She scared stiff. Admitted she hid the diary in the orchard. Said she found it in Sylvia's room after she disappeared. Thought it might get Sylvia in trouble or someone else. Someone else, Miss Marple repeated, her eyes narrowing. Did she say who? No. Clammed up after that. But she's protecting someone. I'd wager my badge on it. Miss Marple set her knitting down, her gaze steady. Inspector, people hide things for all sorts of reasons: fear, loyalty, love. Ellen's not the sort to act without cause. If she hid that diary, it's because she believes Sylvia's secrets are worth protecting. Lyle leaned forward, his voice low. You think Sylvia's alive, don't you? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that Sylvia Hawthorne is a clever young woman who may have had reason to vanish. And I think that diary will tell us why. Lyle stood, tucking the notebook under his arm. I'll let you know when we crack the code. And Miss Marple, be careful. Whoever that stranger was, they didn't sound friendly. She smiled, her eyes twinkling. Oh, I'm always careful, Inspector, but I do find that a little curiosity goes a long way. The next day, Miss Marple returned to the orchard, her eyes scanning the ground where she'd found the notebook. The earth was disturbed, as if someone had been digging recently. She knelt, her fingers brushing the soil, and uncovered a small, tarnished key. Its surface etched with a faint SH. Her heart quickened. Another piece of Sylvia's puzzle, hidden in plain sight. Back at her cottage, she examined the key under a magnifying glass. It was too small for a door, too delicate for a chest. A locket, perhaps, or something else entirely. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. The diary, the stranger, Ellen's fear, and now this keyitch was a thread in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. That evening, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the key in her hand. Ellen's admission to Lyle had resolved the notebook's origin, but the stranger's identity and Sylvia's whereabouts remained elusive. The diary, now in Lyle's hands, would soon yield its secrets, and Miss Marple felt a quiet certainty that the truth was closer than ever. She smiled, her needles clicking once more. The night was full of shadows, but Miss Marple knew that even the darkest mysteries could be unravelled with patience and a keen eye for human nature. Chapter 4. The coded diary. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. A cup of tea steamed beside her, its fragrance mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the garden. She turned the pages of Sylvia Hawthorne's diary, its leather cover worn but intact, the coded entries a puzzle that demanded her attention. Inspector Lyle had delivered the notebook to her that morning, his face etched with frustration after a night of wrestling with its cryptic symbols. It's gibberish to me, Miss Marple, he'd admitted, adjusting his spectacles, but I reckon you'll see something we've missed. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her age, traced the neat rows of numbers and letters. The diary wasn't gibberish. It was a cipher, a deliberate veil over Sylvia's thoughts. She'd seen such things before, young women hiding their secrets in code, fearing prying eyes. Sylvia, she sensed, was no different, her disappearance tied to something she dared to record. The inspector had mentioned a secret fund and a name, Victor Crane, decoded from the first few pages. But the rest remained locked. A challenge Miss Marple relished. She closed the diary and slipped it into her handbag, her mind already turning to the village bazaar that afternoon. St. Mary Mead's annual event was a kaleidoscope of chatter, stalls, and secrets perfect place to observe the undercurrents of village life. If Sylvia's diary pointed to financial misdeeds, as Miss Marple suspected, the bazaar might reveal more. People let their guards down amid the bustle, and Mr. Julian Tarrant, Sylvia's guardian, would likely be there, his polished charm on full display. The bazaar sprawled across the village green, a riot of colour and noise. Canvas tents fluttered in the breeze, laden with homemade jams, knitted scarves, and trays of scones. Children darted between stalls, clutching sticky toffee, apples, while the vicar's wife, Mrs. Langley, presided over a tambola with a zeal that bordered on martial. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, blended into the crowd, her unassuming presence her greatest asset. She paused at a stall selling lavender sachets, her fingers brushing the fabric as she watched Tarrant from the corner of her eye. He stood near the cake stall, his tailored suit impeccable, his smile as smooth as the cream on Mrs. Bantry's Victoria sponge. He was charming a group of villagers, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation. Sylvia would have loved this, he said, his tone wistful. She always adored village traditions. The villagers nodded, some with sympathy, others with skepticism. Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of Tarrant's jaw when a farmer, Mr. Griggs, asked if there was news of Sylvia. Still hopeful she's off on some adventure, Tarrant replied, but his eyes flickered. Betraying unease, Miss Marple's attention shifted to the groundskeeper, Mr. Amos Holt, who lingered near a stall selling gardening tools. His weathered face was set in a scowl, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. She recalled the solicitor's mention of Sylvia's substantial inheritance tied to a family trust. If Tarrant was mismanaging it, as Inspector Lyle suspected, Holt might know something. Groundskeepers, Miss Marple knew, saw more than they let on hidden corners, locked doors, whispered conversations. She made a mental note to watch him as she moved toward the tea tent. A commotion erupted near the edge of the green. Mr. Holt was arguing with Tarrant, their voices low but heated. Miss Marple edged closer, pretending to inspect a tray of biscuits. "That shed's none of your business," Holt growled, his face reddening, locked for a reason. Tarrant's smile didn't waver, but his voice was steel. "Keep it that way, Amos. No need to stir up trouble." The exchange was brief, but it set Miss Marple's mind racing. A locked shed on the Thornfield estate, mentioned so fiercely, could hold answers. She filed the detail away, her knitting needles pausing in her lap as she sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the crowd. The bazaar's rhythm shifted as the afternoon wore on. A fiddler struck up a lively tune, and villagers began to dance, their laughter mingling with the clink of teacups. Miss Marple, however, was drawn to a quieter corner of the green where Ellen Ward, the nervous maid from Thornfield Hall, stood alone, clutching a basket of embroidered napkins. Her eyes darted toward Tarrant, then away, her fingers twisting. The basket's handle, Miss Marple approached, her voice gentle. "Lovely napkins, Ellen. Did you make them yourself?" Ellen started, her pale cheeks flushing. "Oh, Miss Marple, yes, my mother helped." Her words tumbled out, too quick, too anxious. Miss Marple smiled, offering a shilling for a napkin. As Ellen fumbled with the change, Miss Marple leaned closer. "You seem troubled, dear. Is everything all right at the hall?" Ellen's eyes widened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. But the girl swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just, things aren't the same without Miss Sylvia. Mr. Tarrant's been so particular about the grounds. Locking things up." She glanced toward the shed's direction, then caught herself, her lips pressing tight. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly concern. Locking things away can make one curious, can't it? But I'm sure it's all for the best. She patted Ellen's hand, noting the girl's trembling fingers. Ellen knew something, perhaps about the shed, perhaps about Sylvia's diary. Miss Marple resolved to visit the estate herself. That evening, under the guise of returning a borrowed book to Thornfield Hall's library, Miss Marple slipped through the estate's wrought iron gates. The air was cool, the sky a deepening indigo, and the hall loomed like a silent sentinel, its windows glowing faintly. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to go unnoticed, her sensible shoes silent on the gravel path. The shed, tucked behind a row of yew trees, was her target. It was a sturdy structure, its wooden planks weathered but solid. Its door secured with a heavy padlock. Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the shadows. The estate was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. She knelt, her fingers brushing the ground near the shed's base, searching for anything out of place. Her patience was rewarded when she found a loose board, its edge slightly raised. With a gentle tug, it gave way, revealing a small compartment beneath. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with columns of number states, amounts, and cryptic abbreviations. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This was no gardener's log. It was a record of financial transactions, and the figures were staggering. She slipped the ledger into her handbag, replacing the board with care. As she stood, a twig snapped behind her. She froze, her senses sharp. A figure moved in the darkness halt, his silhouette unmistakable. He hadn't seen her, his attention fixed on the shed's lock, which he tested with a grunt of satisfaction. Miss Marple slipped back into the shadows, her mind racing. The ledger pointed to Tarrant's involvement in something illicit, likely the mismanagement of Sylvia's trust. But why hide it in a shed? And what did Holt know? The next morning, the village buzzed with a new rumour. Mrs. Griggs, the farmer's wife, had seen a woman resembling Sylvia in the nearby town of Market Basing, boarding a train. The news reached Miss Marple over breakfast, delivered by Mrs. Bantry, who burst into the cottage with her usual exuberance. "Jane, it's extraordinary. Could Sylvia be alive? Mrs. Griggs swears it was her, though she looked pale, poor thing." Miss Marple set down her toast, her mind sifting through possibilities. "People often see what they hope to see, Dolly, but I'll speak to Inspector Lyle. We must be certain." She kept the ledger's discovery to herself, not wanting to alarm her friend. By midday, she was at the police station, the ledger tucked safely in her bag. Lyle greeted her with a weary smile. "This Sylvia sighting has the village in a tizzy, Miss Marple. I've sent a constable to Market Basing to check." She nodded, producing the ledger. "I found this last night, Inspector. It was hidden near Thornfield Hall's shed. I believe it details irregularities in the Hawthorne Trust." Lyle's eyebrows shot up as he flipped through the pages, his fingers tracing the columns. "This is substantial. Payments to unnamed accounts. Withdrawals far beyond Sylvia's allowance. If Tarrant's behind this, he's been clever." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Clever, but not infallible. People like Mr. Tarrant often underestimate the curiosity of a village, or an old spinster. Lyle chuckled, but his expression grew serious as she handed him Sylvia's diary. "There's more in here, I'm sure. The name Victor Crane keeps appearing. We need to know who he is." That afternoon, Lyle's constable returned from Market Basing with news. The woman wasn't Sylvia, but her cousin, Nora Hawthorne, who bore a striking resemblance. Nora, reached by telephone, agreed to meet Miss Marple at the vicarage. She arrived promptly, her dark hair pinned neatly, her eyes shadowed with worry. "I haven't seen Sylvia in months," she said, her voice low, "but she wrote to me before she vanished. She was frightened, Miss Marple. She said Tarrant was draining her trust, and she feared for her life." Miss Marple's hands stilled on her knitting. Did she mention anyone else? Victor Crane, perhaps? Nora hesitated, then nodded. "She said Victor was helping her, but I don't know how. She was so secretive." Miss Marple's mind turned to the diary's coded entries. Sylvia had been cautious, perhaps too cautious, entrusting her secrets to a cipher and a man whose motives were unclear. As Nora left, Miss Marple lingered at the vicarage, her thoughts on the ledger. Its figures suggested greed, but the diary hinted at fear. Sylvia had been running from something or someone. Tarrant's polished exterior masked a desperate man, and Holt's loyalty to him was suspect. The shed, the ledger, the diary, all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to Thornfield Hall. Miss Marple resolved to confront Tarrant, but not yet. She needed more Crane's role, the diary's full secrets, and proof of Sylvia's fate. That evening, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the ledger open before her. She traced a line of figures, her mind weaving connections. Tarrant's charm, Holt's secrecy, Ellen's fear, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Sylvia, the missing heiress, was the heart of it. Miss Marple closed the ledger. Her decision made, tomorrow she would visit Thornfield Hall again, armed with questions and the weight of evidence. Tarrant would not slip through her fingers, not when Sylvia's truth was so close. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Victor Crandall. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. She sat in her favourite armchair, a cup of Earl Grey, cooling on the side table, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. Her mind, however, was far from the soft wool in her hands. The torn photograph from Thornfield Hall's garden lay on the table, its edges curling slightly. Sylvia Hawthorne's smiling face stared up at her, arm in arm with a man whose features were obscured by the tear. The mystery of Sylvia's disappearance was growing thorns, and Miss Marple's sharp mind was pruning away the distractions to find the truth. She sipped her tea, her pale blue eyes narrowing as she recalled the memorial gathering at Thornfield Hall, the missing locket, Ellen's trembling hands. And now this photograph, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. The village buzzed with rumours, but Miss Marple trusted only what she observed. Human nature, with its predictable flaws and fleeting moments of courage. Her conversation with Mrs. Dolly Bantry the previous evening had added a new name to the puzzle, Victor Crane. Sylvia's disapproved suitor, a man with a shadowed reputation and a knack for slipping through society's cracks. Victor Crane, Miss Marple murmured, setting her knitting aside. A man who courts an heiress and vanishes when she does. Not a coincidence, I think. She rose, smoothing her tweed skirt, and tucked the photograph into her handbag. The church fete was today a perfect opportunity to observe the villagers, and, perhaps, catch a glimpse of the elusive Mr. Crane. St. Mary Mead's fetes were a microcosm of village life gossip flowing as freely as lemonade, secrets hiding behind smiles. If Victor Crane was nearby, or if someone knew his whereabouts, the fete would loosen tongues. The fete sprawled across the village green, a patchwork of colourful stalls under a cloudless July sky. Children darted between tables laden with homemade jams and knitted scarves, their laughter mingling with the accordion's cheerful tune. Miss Marple, in her sensible straw hat and a light cardigan, moved through the crowd with the unobtrusive grace of a sparrow. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. Mrs. Langley's sharp glance at a rival's Victoria sponge, the vicar's flustered attempt to manage the tombola, and Ellen Ward, pale and distracted, arranging scones at the tea stall. Miss Marple paused at a stall selling lavender sachets, her fingers brushing the fragrant bundles as she listened to the chatter around her. Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in a floral dress, was holding court near the cake stall, her voice carrying over the crowd. Double quotes, ... And I told Colonel Bantry that Victor Crane was no good for Sylvia, she was saying to a cluster of women. A charming man, mind you, but charm's often a mask for trouble. Sylvia was besotted, poor thing, but Mr. Tarrant put a stop to it. Said Crane was after her money. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Mrs. Bantry's gossip was as reliable as the church clock accurate in spirit, if not always in detail. She approached, offering a polite smile. "Good morning, Dolly. Quite the turnout today, oh Jane." Mrs. Bantry turned, her earrings glinting. "You're just in time. I was telling Mrs. Price about Sylvia's suitor. Did you know he was seen in Chipping Cleghorn last month? Bold as brass, staying at the Black Swan Inn, indeed." Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her mind sharpened. Chipping Cleghorn was only a short train ride away. And what did Mr. Crane do there? Mrs. Bantry leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Nobody's sure, but Mrs. Harmon saw him talking to a man in a dark coat shady business," she said. "Then he vanished again, just like Sylvia." Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. A man in a dark coat could be anyone, but the timing intrigued her. She excused herself and drifted toward the tea stall, where Ellen was pouring lemonade. With a trembling hand, the girl's eyes darted toward the crowd, as if expecting someone or fearing them. "Good morning, Ellen," Miss Marple said, accepting a glass. "You seem a bit out of sorts. The fate too much for you?" Ellen started, nearly spilling the lemonade. "Oh, Miss Marple. No, I'm just ... tired, is all. Lots to do at the hall, of course," Miss Marple said kindly. "It must be difficult. With all this talk of Sylvia, I found something in the garden at Thornfield Hall, a photograph. Perhaps you've seen it." Ellen's face paled, her fingers tightening on the picture. "A photograph? I don't know anything about that, ma'am." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her gaze held Ellen's. "No need to worry, dear. I only thought it might belong to someone at the hall. Sylvia, perhaps." Ellen's lips parted, but before she could speak, a shadow fell across the stall. Mr. Amos Holt, the groundskeeper at Thornfield Hall, stood there, his weathered face set in a scowl. He was a burly man, with hands calloused from years of tending the estate's gardens, but his eyes held a sharpness that Miss Marple found unsettling. "Ellen, Mr. Tarrant wants you back at the hall," Holt said gruffly. "You're needed." "For the evening shift?" Ellen nodded quickly, setting down the pitcher. "Yes, Mr. Holt, I'll go now." As she hurried away, Miss Marple's gaze followed Holt. He lingered, adjusting a crate of apples, but his movements were deliberate, his eyes scanning the crowd. Then, with a swiftness that belied his bulk, he reached into his pocket and slipped something small into a gap between two crates. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A key glinting briefly in the sunlight before it vanished. She waited until Holt moved toward the raffle stall, then approached the crates, her movements casual. Kneeling as if to tie her shoe, she retrieved the key, a small, brass one, its bow engraved with a faint T. Thornfield Hall, she thought. The locked shed Amos Holt had argued with Tarrant about yesterday. Miss Marple tucked the key into her handbag, her mind racing. Holt's secrecy suggested he was more than a Was he working for Tarrant, hiding something in that shed? Or was he acting on his own, perhaps connected to Victor Crane? The shed was her next step, but she needed to move carefully. Holt's watchful eyes were everywhere. The afternoon waned, and the fate's energy softened into a golden haze. Miss Marple slipped away from the green, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path toward Thornfield Hall. The estate loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls casting long shadows across the lawn. The shed stood at the edge of the orchard, half hidden by apple trees, its padlock glinting in the fading light. She glanced around, ensuring no one was near, and approached the shed. The key fit perfectly, the lock clicking open with a satisfying snick. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the scent of earth and old wood. Tools lined the walls, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a wooden crate in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. She lifted the lid, revealing a small, locked box nestled among gardening gloves. Her fingers traced the box's surface, finding a faint engraving, S.H. Sylvia Hawthorne. Her heart thudded. This was no coincidence. She tugged at the lock, but it held firm. Another key, then one she didn't have. As she pondered her next move, a shadow darkened the doorway. Miss Marple turned, her composure unshaken, to find Nora Hawthorne, Sylvia's cousin, standing there. Nora's auburn hair was pinned neatly, but her eyes were wide with worry. Miss Marple, Nora exclaimed, "I saw you leave the fete and followed. What are you doing here?" Miss Marple smiled, closing the crate. "Just satisfying an old woman's curiosity, my dear. And you? Why follow me?" Nora hesitated, twisting her gloves. I got a letter from Sylvia before she disappeared. It was cryptic, said something about Crane's proof. I thought you might know what it meant. Since you're looking into things." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Crane's proof. Did she say what it was? Nora shook her head. No. But she sounded scared. Said Victor had something that could ruin Mr. Tarrant. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't sure who to trust. Miss Marple nodded, her mind piecing together the threads. Sylvia had trusted Crane, with evidence perhaps of Tarrant's embezzlement. The box in the shed might hold it, but opening it would require caution. Holt's key suggested he was guarding it, likely for Tarrant. "Come, Nora," Miss Marple said, guiding her out of the shed. "Let's lock this up and keep it our secret for now. We'll need to find Mr. Crane, I think." As they left the orchard, Miss Marple relocked the shed, slipping the key back into her handbag. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Thornfield Hall in twilight. The box's contents would have to wait, but the key was hers, and with it, a step closer to Sylvia. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the key and photograph on her table. Nora's revelation about Crane's proof echoed in her mind. Victor Crane was no mere suitor. He was a player in a game of secrets, perhaps Sylvia's ally, perhaps her betrayer. The box in the shed held answers, but so did Crane. And finding him was now her priority. She picked up her knitting, the needles resuming their steady rhythm. Human nature, she thought, was like a wool tangled until you followed the thread. Sylvia was out there, alive or in hiding, and Miss Marple would unravel the truth, one careful stitch at a time. The next day, she would take the train to Chipping Cleghorn, to the Black Swan in find Victor Crane. The shed secrets would wait, but the shadow of Crane loomed large, and Miss Marple was ready to step into it. Chapter 6. The blackmail letters. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, the kind that nipped at the fingertips and made the village's cobblestone paths glisten with dew. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her favourite woolen shawl, sat by her cottage window, her knitting needles clicking softly as she pondered the letters she'd found in the shed at Thornfield Hall. The papers, yellowed and creased, had been tucked inside a locked box, their contents a tangle of Sylvia. Hawthorne's fears and accusations. Sylvia, the missing heiress, had written of her guardian, Mr. Julian Tarrant, siphoning funds from her trust, with hints of a shadowy accomplice. The word blackmail had leapt from the page, scrawled in Sylvia's hurried hand, and it now sat heavily in Miss Marple's mind like a pebble in a shoe. She set her knitting aside and sipped her tea, her sharp eyes drifting to the garden where sparrows flitted among the roses. The letters pointed to Victor Crane, Sylvia's disapproved suitor, as her ally in uncovering Tarrant's schemes. But Crane was elusive, a name whispered in shadows, and Miss Marple knew she'd need to tread carefully to find him. The village was abuzz with the memorial gathering's aftermath gossip about the missing locket, Ellen's nervous glances, and Tarrant's too smooth assurances that Sylvia had simply eloped. Miss Marple, however, saw through the veneer. People, she mused, were like skeins of wool. Pull one thread, and the whole pattern unravels. Her plan was simple but bold. Track Crane to the neighbouring town of Milbury, where Mrs. Bantry had mentioned a man of his description lurking at the Red Lion Inn. Milbury was a bustling market town, its narrow streets a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's sleepy charm, and Miss Marple knew it would test her knack for blending in. She donned her best Hatter sensible affair with a single feather and caught the morning bus, her small handbag clutching the letters like a treasure map. The Red Lion Inn was a squat, timbered building at Milbury's heart, its sign creaking in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the murmur of farmers haggling over grain prices. Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her grey eyes scanning the room over a cup of lukewarm tea. The innkeeper, a ruddy-faced man named Mr. Gibbs, bustled about, his apron stained with ale. She caught his eye and, with a disarming smile, inquired about a guest who might resemble a friend of Mr. Victor Crane, perhaps. Gibbs scratched his beard, his gaze narrowing. "Crane, you say? Tall chap, dark hair, bit of a shifty look. He's been in and out, rents a room upstairs. Not one for chatter, mind you. Keeps to himself, always scribbling in a notebook." Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. Might he be in now? "I've a message from a mutual acquaintance." Gibbs shrugged. "Saw him head up not 10 minutes ago, room 12, top of the stairs. But he's not fond of visitors." She thanked him and made her way to the creaking staircase, her steps light but deliberate. The inn's upper floor was a maze of narrow corridors, the wallpaper peeling like old skin. Room 12's door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the floorboards. She knocked softly, her voice carrying the gentle lilt of an elderly aunt. "Mr. Crane, might I have a word?" A rustle came from within, followed by a low, wary voice. "Who's there?" "Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. I'm a friend of Sylvia Hawthorne's. I believe you know her." The door swung open, revealing a lean man in his 30s, his dark eyes darting like a cornered fox. Victor Crane's suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and a faint stubble shadowed his jaw. He gestured her inside, closing the door quickly. The room was sparser: narrow object bed, a wobbly desk, a trunk in the corner, but papers littered the desk, covered in frantic handwriting. "What do you want with Sylvia?" Crane's voice was sharp, his fingers twitching toward a penknife on the table. Miss Marple sat on the edge of the bed, her posture calm but her eyes keen. "I want to find her, Mr. Crane. She's been missing for a month, and I have reason to believe you know something about it." She pulled one of the letters from her bag, its ink smudged but legible. "Sylvia wrote to you about a blackmail scheme involving her trust. She trusted you with documents to protect her." Crane's face paled, his hand freezing mid-reach. Where did you get that?" "From a shed at Thornfield Hall. Sylvia hid them well, but not well enough." She tilted her head, her gaze steady. "You were helping her expose Mr. Tarrant's embezzlement, weren't you?" Crane sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. She was scared. Tarrant was draining her inheritance, bit by bit. She found ledgers, proof of his theft, but he caught her snooping. "She gave me the documents to keep safe, said she'd confront him when the time was right. But then she vanished." Miss Marple's fingers tightened around the letter. "Did she tell you where she went?" He shook his head. "No. She said it was safer if I didn't know. But she mentioned a secret fund, something Tarrant didn't know about. She was planning to use it to escape him." Before Miss Marple could press further, a shout echoed from below, followed by the acrid scent of smoke. Gibbs's voice roared through the inn. "Fire! Get out, everyone!" Crane leaped to his feet, grabbing a satchel from the trunk. Miss Marple, with surprising agility, followed him to the window. Flames licked the lower floor, the air thick with heat. Crane smashed the glass with a chair, clearing the shards. The drainpipe climbed down. Miss Marple hesitated, her rage betraying her, but Crane's arms steadied her as they scrambled onto the pipe. The metal groaned under their weight, but they reached the alley below, coughing as smoke billowed above. A crowd gathered, shouting, as Gibbs and his staff doused the flames with buckets of water. Miss Marple's eyes watered, but her mind was clear. This was no accident. The fire had started to conveniently near Crane's room. "Are you hurt?" she asked, brushing soot from her shawl. Crane shook his head, clutching his satchel. "I'm fine, but my papers, some of them were in there. The documents Sylvia gave you. Safe." He patted the satchel. "I keep them on me." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Someone wanted them destroyed, or you silenced." Crane's jaw tightened. "Tarrant. He's got men everywhere." The fire brigade arrived, their hoses hissing as the crowd thickened. Miss Marple pulled Crane aside, her voice low. "Meet me tomorrow at St. Mary Mead's church, noon. Bring the documents. We'll sort this out with Inspector Lyle." Crane nodded, his eyes haunted. "If Tarrant finds out I'm alive, he'll come for me. Then we'll be ready," she said, her tone firm, as the bus carried her back to St. Mary. Mead, Miss Marple's mind churned. The fire was a desperate move, a sign Tarrant was closing in. Back in her cottage, she lit a lamp and reread Sylvia's letters, her fingers tracing the words secret room. It nagged at her, a puzzle piece out of place. Thornfield Hall was old, its walls thick with history. A hidden room wasn't impossible. The next morning, she found a surprise in her postbox. A singed letter fragment, its edges charred but the words clear. Thornfield's secret room. Safe. Evidence. The handwriting was Sylvia's, and the postmark was Milbury, dated the day before. Someone had salvaged it from the fire and sent it to her Han ally, perhaps, or a taunt. Her heart quickened. Sylvia was closer than she'd thought. At noon, Crane arrived at the church, his satchel bulging. He handed her a stack of documents, ledgers, receipts, and a note from Sylvia detailing Tarrant's blackmail demands. She said the secret room was her last resort, Crane whispered, glancing over his shoulder. If she's alive, she's there. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. You've done well, Mr. Crane. Stay low until I contact you. Tarrant's reach is long. As Crane slipped away, Miss Marple tucked the documents into her bag, her resolve hardening. The secret room was the key, and Thornfield Hall was her. Next stop, the village clock chimed, its echo a reminder of time slipping away. Sylvia was out there, waiting, and Miss Marple would find her. Chapter 7. The secret room. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silvery sheen across the dukest lawns of Thornfield Hall. Miss Jane Marple, her slight figure draped in a dark shawl, moved with the quiet grace of a shadow through the estate's sprawling gardens. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of late roses and damp earth. Her steps were deliberate, her eyes sharp despite the late hour, scanning the darkness for any sign of disturbance. She had not come here on a whim. The faint creak of a gate and the hurried crunch of gravel near the hall earlier that evening had stirred her curiosity. In her experience, footsteps in the night rarely meant anything innocent. Miss Marple paused near a gnarled yew tree, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. She adjusted her spectacles, her mind replaying the events of the past few days. Nervous fidgeting, the torn photograph of Sylvia with an unknown man, and the whispered mention of Sylvia's diary she'd overheard by the orchard. The diary itself, now safely in Inspector Lyle's hands, had hinted at secrets too dangerous to be left buried. But it was the hall itself, Thornfield, with its looming gables and secretive corners, that seemed to pulse with answers. Tonight, she intended to find one. A faint rustle came from the direction of the library wing, where tall windows glowed faintly with the flicker of a single lamp. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Someone was inside, and at this hour it was unlikely to be. A servant polishing silver. She crept closer, her sensible shoes silent on the grass, until she reached the terrace. The library's French doors were ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the stone. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart steady but her senses alight. Years of observing human nature had taught her that secrets, like moths, were drawn to the light and often burned by it. Inside, the library was a cavern of shadows, its high shelves lined with leather-bound tomes that smelled of age and dust. Miss Marple slipped through the door, her small frame blending into the darkness. She moved toward a bookcase at the far end, where a faint draught stirred the air. Her fingers brushed the spines, searching for something out of place, a memory. Flickered her nephew Raymond once mentioned a novel about a hidden room behind a bookcase, dismissed as fanciful. But Miss Marple never dismissed anything, not when human greed and fear were involved. Her fingers caught on a volume of the complete Angler, oddly misaligned. She tugged gently, and with a soft click, the bookcase shifted, revealing a narrow gap. Her breath caught not from fear, but from the thrill of being right. She pushed, and the bookcase swung inward, unveiling a small, musty room lit by a single bulb dangling from the ceiling. The walls were bare save for a heavy iron safe in the corner, its surface scratched but imposing. Beside it, a wooden table held a stack of ledgers, their pages yellowed and curling. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Well, well," she murmured. Stepping inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and secrecy. She approached the ledgers, her gloved hands careful not to disturb the dust. The first page she opened revealed rows of numbers, meticulously inked, but with annotations in a hurried scrawl, transferred to offshore account and Hawthorne Trust adjustment. Her lips tightened. Sylvia's inheritance, tied to the family trust, was at the heart of this mystery, and these ledgers were no innocent record of household expenses. A soft thud from the library startled her. She froze, her hand resting on the ledger. The door to the hidden room was still ajar, and through the gap she saw a shadow move across the library floor. Her heart quickened, but her mind remained clear. She stepped back, pressing herself against the wall beside the safe, her shawl blending with the shadows. The bookcase creaked, and Ellen Ward appeared, her face pale in the dim light. A feather duster clutched in her trembling hands. "Miss Marple," Ellen gasped, her eyes wide with panic. What are you doing here?" Miss Marple tilted. Her head, her expression mild but her gaze piercing. "I might ask you the same, Ellen. Dusting at midnight seems rather unusual." Ellen's cheeks flushed, and she clutched the duster tighter, as if it could shield her from scrutiny. "I was just tidying up. Mr. Tarrant likes the library spotless, and I couldn't sleep, so you chose to clean a hidden room?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her words cut like a needle through fabric. She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Ellen's. "You know more than you're saying, my dear. About Sylvia, about this place. Fear is a heavy burden, but keeping secrets can be heavier still." Ellen's shoulders slumped, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might collapse. "I didn't mean no harm," Ellen whispered, her voice breaking. "I was only doing what I was told. Miss Sylvia, she trusted me, but I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Miss Marple's voice softened, coaxing rather than accusing. She had seen this before, loyalty tangled with fear. A servant caught in a web not of their making. Ellen's eyes darted to the safe, then back to Miss Marple. "I can't say he'll know. He always knows. Mr. Tarrant," Miss Marple asked, though she already suspected the answer. Ellen's silence was confirmation enough. "Ellen, if Sylvia is in danger, or if she's alive and hiding, every moment you keep silent puts her at greater risk. You're a good girl. You don't want that on your conscience." Tears welled in Ellen's eyes, and she shook her head. "I don't know where she is, I swear, but she left things, papers, important ones. She said to keep them safe, but I was scared. Mr. Tarrant, he's got a temper, and Mr. Marsh." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the name. Felix Marsh, the shadowy figure Nora had mentioned, loomed ever larger in this puzzle. "Go on," she urged, her voice steady. Before Ellen could speak, a sharp cry echoed from outside, near the lake, that bordered Thornfield's grounds. Miss Marple's head snapped toward the sound, her instincts flaring. Ellen froze, her face a mask of terror. "That's Tom," she whispered. "Tom Weaver. He's always poking about the estate at night." Miss Marple's mind raced. Tom Weaver, the village handyman, was a harmless busybody, always tinkering with gates or mending fences after hours. But a cry like that meant trouble. "Stay here," she instructed Ellen, her tone firm. "Don't touch anything." She slipped back through the bookcase, closing it just enough to conceal the room, and hurried toward the French doors. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp. The lake was a short walk, its surface glinting under the moon. As she approached, she saw a figure crumpled on the Bankton Weaver, clutching his head, a trickle of blood darkening his temple. Tom. Miss Marple knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his wrist to check his pulse. It was steady, thank goodness. What happened? Tom groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Someone hit me. Didn't see much, just a shadow. Big fella near the lake. Looked like he was digging. Miss Marple's gaze darted to the ground nearby, where the earth was disturbed, as if someone had been scraping at it with a shovel. Her mind flashed to the locket Sylvia wore, the one engraved with SH that had gone missing at the memorial. Could it be here, buried to hide evidence? She helped Tom sit up, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the attacker. "Stay still, Tom," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I'll fetch help." She glanced back toward the hall, where Ellen's silhouette hovered in the library window. The girl hadn't moved, but her presence was a reminder of the secrets still locked away. Miss Marple returned to the disturbed patch of earth, her fingers probing the soil. It was loose, recently turned. She dug carefully, her nails catching on something hard. A glint of silver emerged a locket, identical to the one from the memorial, engraved with SH. She turned it over, her heart quickening. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded but clear. Sylvia, smiling, her arm round a man whose face was obscured by a tear in the image. The same man from the photograph in the garden. She tucked the locket into her pocket, her mind whirling. The attacker, likely Holt, the groundskeeper, had been desperate to hide this. But why? And what did it mean that Sylvia's locket was buried here, so close to the hall? Was it a message, a clue, or a cruel misdirection? Footsteps crunched behind her, and Miss Marple turned to see Inspector Lyle striding across the lawn, his coat flapping in the night breeze. "Miss Marple, I got your note about the orchard, but what's this?" "Tom's hurt, attacked," Miss Marple said, rising. "He saw someone digging by the lake. I suspect it was Mr. Holt, though I've no proof yet. And I found this." She held out the locket, its silver catching the moonlight. Lyle's brow furrowed as he examined it. "Sylvia's, but why bury it? To hide it from us? Or from someone else?" Miss Marple said, her voice low. "Someone who knows Sylvia is alive and wants to keep her hidden." Tom described a man resembling Holt, but we'll need his statement to be sure. Lyle nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll have my men take Tom to the doctor and search the grounds. If Holt's involved, he won't get far." Miss Marple glanced back at the hall, where the library light still burned. "There's more, Inspector. I found a hidden room behind the library bookcase. There's a safe inside, and ledgers that suggest tampering with Sylvia's trust. Ellen knows about it, but she's terrified. I think she's protecting Sylvia or someone else." Lyle's eyes narrowed. A hidden room. "Good Lord, Miss Marple, you've a knack for finding trouble. I'll get a locksmith for that safe first thing tomorrow. If there's evidence of fraud, we'll have Tarrant dead to rights. And Holt," Miss Marple added. "He's Tarrant's man, I'm certain. But there's another piece to this Felix Marsh. Ellen mentioned him, and Nora tied him to Sylvia's fears. We need to know his role." Lyle rubbed his chin, his expression grim. "Marsh is a slippery one. I've heard his name in financial circles. Never anything good. I'll look into him. For now, let's get Tom sorted and secure that room." As Lyle called for his constables, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the locket in her hand. Its weight felt like a promise of answers, of justice, of Sylvia's safety. She thought of the diary, the ledgers, the buried locket, each a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Her mind, sharp as ever, began to weave them together, but one question burned brightest. Where was Sylvia, and what was she hiding from? The night deepened, and as the constables arrived to tend to Tom, Miss Marple slipped back toward the hall. Ellen was still in the library, her face pale but resolute. Miss Marple approached, her voice soft but firm. "Ellen, we found the locket. It was buried by the lake. Whoever did that didn't want it found. Help me, my dear. Help Sylvia." Ellen's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'll try, Miss Marple. I swear I will." Miss Marple smiled, a small, knowing smile. "That's all I ask." She glanced at the bookcase, the hidden room waiting beyond it. The safe held secrets, and she was determined to unlock them. Tomorrow she would face the safe's contents, whatever truths they held about Sylvia's disappearance, as she left the hall. The locket safe in her pocket, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase. Human nature, with all its flaws and fears, was her battlefield, and she was no stranger to victory. The lake glimmered under the moon, silent but full of secrets, and Miss Marple knew she was one step closer to unravelling them all. Chapter 8. The Safe's Secrets. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's stone cottages and draping Thornfield Hall in an ethereal hush. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting, needles clicking rhythmically, a soft counterpoint to the distant coo of a wood pigeon. Her sharp eyes, however, were not on the pale wool pooling in her lap, but on the world beyond specifically, the memory of the hidden room she'd discovered in Thornfield Hall's library the previous night. A room with a safe, its iron face gleaming with secrets. She'd left it untouched, knowing Inspector Lyle's arrival with a locksmith was imminent. But the weight of its contents pressed on her mind like a half-remembered dream. The village was stirring now, the milkman's cart rattling down the lane, and Miss Marple set her knitting aside. She adjusted her shawl, her movements precise, and prepared to meet Lyle at Thornfield Hall. The safe, she suspected, held the key to unravelling the tangled threads of Sylvia Hawthorne's disappearance and Julian Tarrant's role in it. Her intuition, honed by years of observing the quiet betrayals of village life, whispered that greed was at the heart of this mystery, and the safe was its vault. At Thornfield Hall, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and fading roses. The grand old house, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, seemed to hold its breath as Miss Marple stepped into the entrance hall. Inspector Lyle, a sturdy man with a moustache that seemed perpetually furrowed, greeted her with a nod. Beside him stood Mr. Clarence Finch, the locksmith, a wiry figure clutching a leather satchel of tools that clinked softly as he moved. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Lyle said, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "Finch here assures me he can open that safe in no time. I trust your instincts about it. Seems like the sort of place Tarrant would hide something incriminating." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. People like Mr. Tarrant, Inspector R, predictable in their unpredictability. A safe is a natural choice for a man who trusts no one but himself. They moved to the library, where the hidden room lay behind a bookcase lined with leather-bound volumes of Dickens and Thackeray. Miss Marple had found it by chance the previous night, her fingers brushing a concealed latch while tracing the spine of Vanity Fair. Now, with Lyle's permission, she pressed the latch again. and the bookcase swung inward with a groan, revealing the small, dimly lit chamber. The safe squatted in the corner, its black surface unyielding, a silent guardian of Tarrant's secrets. Finch set to work, his tools clinking like a jeweler's kit as he probed the lock. Miss Marple stood back, her eyes scanning the room. The walls were bare, save for a single painting, a moody seascape, its waves churning under a storm-dark sky. Something about it felt off, the frame slightly askew, but she filed the thought away as Lyle watched Finch with growing impatience. "Any luck, Finch?" Lyle asked, shifting his weight. "Patience, Inspector," Finch muttered, his ear pressed to the safe. "These old beasts have a rhythm. You've got to listen for it." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the doorway, where Ellen Ward, the nervous maid, hovered. Her apron was crumpled, her hands twisting together as if trying to wring out her anxiety. Miss Marple had seen that look before on Mrs. Langley's cook, years ago when she'd been caught slipping sugar to her sweetheart. Ellen's eyes darted to the safe, then away, her lips trembling. "Ellen, dear," Miss Marple said gently, stepping closer. "You look as though you've seen a ghost. Perhaps you'd like to sit down." Ellen flinched, her pale cheeks flushing. "No, ma'am, I'm fine, just dusting, you see. Mr. Tarrant likes the library kept spotless. Dusting at this hour." Miss Marple's tone was kind, but her eyes were sharp. In a hidden room no one's supposed to know about. Hands froze. I didn't mean to pry, ma'am. I saw the bookcase open last night, and I thought, what, Ellen?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost maternal, but it carried a quiet insistence that made the maid's shoulders sag. Before Ellen could answer, a loud click echoed through the room. Finch stepped back, grinning. "Got it. Stubborn old thing, but she's open." Lyle strode forward, pulling the safe's door wide. Inside were stacks of documents, neatly bound with red ribbon, and a small ledger, its cover worn but embossed with the initials J.T. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Julian Tarrant's handiwork, no doubt. Lyle rifled through the papers, his brow furrowing. Bank statements, transfer records. Looks like transactions from the Hawthorne Trust. And not the sort Sylvia would have approved, I'd wager. Miss Marple peered over his shoulder, her eyes catching on a series of withdrawals, each larger. Then the last, funneled to an account labelled VC, Victor Crane, she thought, the name Sylvia had mentioned in her coded diary. The ledger was a map of betrayal. Each entry a step in Tarrant's scheme to siphon Sylvia's inheritance. "These are no small sums," Miss Marple murmured. "Mr. Tarrant has been very busy, hasn't he?" Lyle nodded grimly. "Busy enough to want Sylvia out of the way. But where is she? That's what I can't figure." Miss Marple glanced at Ellen, who was inching toward the door. "Ellen, dear, you've been with the household a long time. Did you ever see Mr. Tarrant with these papers? Or, perhaps, someone else?" Ellen's eyes widened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. But the maid's shoulders slumped, and she whispered, "I knew about the safe, ma'am. I saw Mr. Tarrant put things in it late at night, when he thought no one was watching. I didn't want to know, but Miss Sylvia, she trusted me. I couldn't betray her." Miss Marple's heart softened. Ellen's fear wasn't just for herself. Was for Sylvia, a girl she'd likely watched grow up. "You've been protecting her, haven't you?" she said gently, "keeping her secrets, even when it frightened you." Ellen nodded, tears welling. "I didn't know what to do, ma'am. Mr. Tarrant, he's not what he seems." He'd get so angry if Miss Sylvia asked about her money. I heard them arguing months ago, before she vanished. Lyle's head snapped up. Arguing about the trust. Did Sylvia suspect something? Ellen hesitated, then nodded. She said she'd found papers, ones Mr. Tarrant didn't want her to see. She was scared, said she'd go to Mr. Gale, the solicitor, but then she was gone. Miss Marple's mind raced. Sylvia had been close to uncovering Tarrant's embezzlement, and that knowledge had made her a target. The safe's contents were proof, but they were only half the story. Where was Sylvia now? Hiding, perhaps, as Miss Marple had begun to suspect, driven by fear of Tarrant's wrath. Before she could press Ellen further, a commotion erupted outside. Mrs. Dollyban's voice, bright and breathless, carried through the hall. Miss Marple, Inspector. You'll never believe it. Mrs. Langley's cousin swears she saw Sylvia in London, near King's Cross, just last week. Lyle's moustache twitched. London, that's a new one. Any details? Mrs. Bantry swept into the room, her hat slightly askew from her haste. Only that she looked pale, nervous, like she was running from something. Wearing a grey coat, Mrs. Langley said, and carrying a small case. Could it be her? Miss Marple's mind whirred. Sylvia alive, in London. It was possible, but the timing felt too convenient, like a distraction thrown into the villagers' gossip mill. She'd seen such tactics before, while Mr. Harrow's wife had spread rumours of his travels to cover his gambling debts. We must be cautious, Dolly, she said. Rumours are like shadows. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're just tricks of the light. Lyle frowned. I'll send a man to London to check. But if Sylvia's hiding, she's got reason to stay out of sight. These documents, he tapped the safe's contents, they're enough to put Tarrant away for fraud, but we need Sylvia to seal the case. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting back to the seascape painting. Something about it nagged at her, a detail out of place. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the frame. It was heavy, too heavy for a simple canvas. With a gentle tug, she tilted it forward, revealing a small compartment behind it. Inside was a folded note, its edges yellowed but intact. Inspector, she said, her voice steady, I believe we've missed something. Lyle took the note, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was Sylvia's, unmistakable from the diary's looping script. I'm safe, but I can't come back. Yet, he knows I know. The locket holds the truth. S.H. Lyle's eyes widened. The locket, the one we found by the lake. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The locket, engraved with S.H., had seemed a simple trinket when they'd found it buried near Thornfield's lake. But Sylvia's note suggested it was more a key, perhaps, to her survival. We must examine it again, she said. Sylvia's cleverer than we thought. She's left us a trail. They returned to Lyle's office, where the locket lay in an evidence box. It was a delicate thing, silver with a filigree clasp, the kind a young heiress might cherish. Miss Marple turned it over in her hands, her fingers probing the edges. With a soft click, the back sprang open, revealing a tiny folded scrap of paper tucked inside. Lyle leaned in as she unfolded it. The note was brief, written in Sylvia's hand. Trust Nora. She knows where I am. Don't let him win, Nora. Lyle muttered. Sylvia's cousin. She's been quiet since that bizarre business. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Nora had claimed Sylvia feared for her life, but this note suggested a deeper trust between the cousins. Sylvia was alive, hiding, and Nora was her confidant. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. Embezzlement was clear, but who was he in Sylvia's note? Tarrant alone, or someone else pulling the strings? As Lyle dispatched a constable to fetch Nora, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Ellen. The maid's fear was genuine, but her loyalty to Sylvia ran deeper. "Ellen," she said, turning to the maid, who still lingered by the door, "you've done well to protect Miss Sylvia, but if there's anything more, you know anything at all it could save her." Ellen's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know where she is, ma'am, I swear, but I saw Mr. Tarrant with another man, late at night, in the study. A tall man, with a scar on his cheek. Miss Sylvia mentioned him once, said his name was Marsh, I think. I think she was afraid of him, too." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Felix Marsh, the shadowy figure Nora had mentioned, linked to Victor Crane. The web was growing tighter, and Marsh was a new thread she hadn't fully unraveled. "Thank you, Ellen," she said softly. "You've been braver than you know." As the afternoon sun dipped low, casting golden light through the library's windows, Miss Marple felt a quiet resolve settle over her. Sylvia was alive, hiding from Tarrant and perhaps Marsh, her locket a lifeline to the truth. The safe secrets had exposed Tarrant's greed, but the note in the locket pointed to a larger game won. Miss Marple was determined to win. She tucked her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her mind already planning the next move. Nora would need to be questioned, gently but firmly, and Marsh's role clarified. The village of St. Mary Mead might seem sleepy, but its secrets were as sharp as her knitting needles, and Miss Marple was ready to stitch them together. Chapter 9. The Threatening Shadow. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's cobblestone paths and thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, their rhythm as steady as her thoughts. The note she'd found in Sylvia Hawthorne's locket lay on the table beside her. Its cryptic words, "I'm safe, but I can't come back yet," etched in her mind. Sylvia was alive, hiding from a danger that cast a long shadow over Thornfield Hall. That shadow, Miss Marple suspected, had a name: Felix Marsh, the elusive associate of Julian Tarrant, whose presence in the village had stirred unease like a pebble dropped in a still pond. The previous day's discovery of the safe's contents documents, exposing Tarrant's embezzlement, had tightened the noose around his polished neck. Yet Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing the quiet treacheries of village life, told her Marsh was the true orchestrator. His name had surfaced in Sylvia's diary, whispered by Nora, and now lingered in the air like the faint scent of smoke before a fire. The question was how to draw him out without endangering Sylvia or tipping her hand. Miss Marple tucked the note into her cardigan pocket and rose, her movements deliberate despite the slight ache in her knees. The village council meeting was set for noon at the parish hall, a gathering where Tarrant, ever the charming host, would likely appear with Marsh in tow. It was the perfect stage to observe their dynamic, to catch the flicker of guilt or fear in their eyes. She adjusted her hat, a modest affair with a single violet ribbon, and stepped into the crisp morning air. The parish hall buzzed with the usual village chatter, Mrs. Langley lamenting the price of flour, Mr. Gale fussing over the council's budget, and young Tom Weaver boasting about his new bicycle. Miss Marple slipped into a chair near the back, her eyes scanning the room. Tarrant stood near the front, his tailored suit a touch too pristine for a village meeting, his smile as smooth as polished glass. Beside him, a man she hadn't seen before but knew instantly to be Felix Marsh. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones, and eyes that darted like a fox's, assessing the room. His dark overcoat seemed out of place in the warm September light filtering through the windows, as the meeting droned on discussions of road repairs and the upcoming harvest festival. Miss Marple watched Marsh. He leaned close to Tarrant, whispering something that made the latter's jaw tighten. A moment later, Tarrant laughed, too loudly, drawing curious glances. A crack in the facade, Miss Marple thought. Her fingers, hidden in her lap, traced the outline of the locket note. Marsh was pressuring Tarrant, she was sure of it. But over what? Money? Sylvia's whereabouts? Or something more sinister? The meeting adjourned, and villagers spilled into the hall's small garden for tea and biscuits. Miss Marple lingered, sipping her Earl Grey, her eyes following Marsh as he stepped aside to light a cigarette. Tarrant joined him, their conversation low and tense. She edged closer, pretending to admire a rosebush. "You're pushing too hard." "Felix," Tarrant muttered, his voice clipped. "If she's found, it's over for both of us." Marsh exhaled a plume of smoke, his smile thin. "Then make sure she isn't. You've handled worse messes, Julian." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Sylvia. They knew she was alive, and they feared her return. But Marsh's tone cool, commanding suggested he held the reins. Tarrant was a pawn, albeit a willing one, in a game Marsh controlled. Before she could hear more, Mrs. Bantry's voice cut through the air. "Jane, dear, have you seen the new roses? Simply divine." Her friend's enthusiasm was genuine, but her timing was dreadful. Miss Marple smiled, allowing herself to be pulled away, but not before catching Marsh's glance in her direction. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment she felt the weight of his scrutiny. "He's watching me," she realized. Good, let him wander. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple brewed a fresh pot of tea and sat at her writing desk. The note from Sylvia's locket was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. She needed Nora's help too. Lure Sylvia out of hiding, and she needed to understand Marsh's role. As she pondered, a sharp rap at the door startled her. She opened it to find a folded paper slipped under the mat, no messenger in sight. Her heart sank as she unfolded it. The typed words stark against the white page. "Stop meddling, old woman, or you'll regret it." The threat was crude, almost theatrical, but it sent a chill through her. Not for her own safety, she'd faced worse in her time, but for what it revealed. Marsh, or someone close to him, knew she was closing in. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, her resolve hardening. Fear was a tactic of the desperate, and desperation made men careless. She telephoned Inspector Lyle, her voice calm as she recounted the threat. "I suspect Mr. Marsh's typewriter may be of interest," she said, describing the letter's distinct font, which she'd noticed matched one used in a council notice Marsh had drafted. Lyle, ever practical, promised to investigate. "Be careful, Miss Marple," he added. "This lot's nastier than they look." "Most villains are, Inspector," she replied, hanging up with a faint smile. Nastiness was no match for observation and patience. The next morning, Miss Marple visited Nora at the small boarding house where she was staying. Nora, pale and nervous, clutched a cup of tea as if it were a lifeline. "I can't believe Sylvia's alive," she whispered. "But why hasn't she come back?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "She's frightened, my dear. But she trusts you. That letter she sent you, mentioning Crane's proof, it means she's counting on us to finish what she started." She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Will you help me bring her home?" Nora's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. What do you need me to do? Miss Marple outlined her plan. They would spread a rumour that Sylvia had been spotted in St. Mary Mead, carrying documents that could ruin Tarrant. The rumour would reach Marsh, whose reaction would reveal his next move. Nora hesitated, then agreed, her loyalty to her cousin outweighing her fear. Over the next 2 days, Miss Marple and Nora worked quietly. Nora mentioned Sylvia's return to Mrs. Langley, who couldn't resist gossiping at the tea shop. Miss Marple dropped hints at the post office, where the clerk, a notorious chatterbox, would ensure the news spread. By evening, the village hummed with speculation. Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the street, knowing Marsh would act soon. That night, as the village clock struck 10, a shadow moved past her gate. She peered through the curtains, her heart steady despite the hour. It was Holt, the groundskeeper, his face half hidden by a cap. He slipped a parcel into her mailbox and vanished into the dark. Miss Marple waited until the street was still, then retrieved a small package wrapped in brown paper, addressed to her in the same typed font as the threat. Inside was a single sheet. You're too late. Sylvia's proof is gone. The words were meant to intimidate, but Miss Marple saw through them. Marsh was rattled, trying to scare her off before she could find Sylvia. She smiled faintly, tucking the note beside the first. He's slipping, she thought, and I'm closer than he knows. The following day, Inspector Lyle arrived at her cottage, his face grim. You were right about the typewriter, he said. We traced the font to Marsh's office at Thornfield Hall. He's been typing counsel, notices and, it seems, your threats. Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. He's trying to protect his scheme, Inspector. But he's made a mistake. Fear makes men bold, but it also makes them careless. Lyle raised an eyebrow. You're not suggesting we let him keep at it? Not at all, she said, her eyes twinkling. I'm suggesting we give him a reason to act. Nora's ready to help, and I believe Sylvia is closer than we think. They finalized the plan over tea. Nora would visit Thornfield Hall, claiming she'd received a letter from Sylvia, begging her to retrieve documents hidden in the library. The rumor would draw Marsh out, forcing him to confront the possibility of Sylvia's return. Lyle would station constables nearby, ready to act if Marsh took the bait. The village dance that evening was the perfect setting. The hall glowed with fairy lights, and fiddles filled the air with lively tunes. Miss Marple, in her best lavender dress, blended into the crowd, her eyes on Tarrant and Marsh. Nora, pale but determined, approached Tarrant, her voice loud enough to carry. I got a letter from Sylvia, she said, her hands trembling. She's coming back with proof documents that'll ruin you. Tarrant's smile faltered, and Marsh's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. The crowd didn't notice, caught up in the dance, but Miss Marple saw the panic flicker across Marsh's face. He whispered something to Tarrant, who nodded curtly, then excused himself. Holt, lingering near the punch table, followed them out. Miss Marple slipped out a side door, her heart pounding with anticipation. She knew Marsh would head for the library, desperate to secure or destroy any evidence Sylvia might have left. Lyle's constables were hidden near Thornfield Hall, waiting for her signal. As she reached the estate's gates, she saw Marsh's silhouette moving toward the library window. A crowbar in hand, she signaled Lyle with a flash of her pocket torch, a trick she'd learned from a nephew in the war. Moments later, the constables emerged from the shadows, their voices sharp as they ordered Marsh to drop the crowbar. He froze, then bolted, but the constables were faster, tackling him to the ground. In the scuffle, a folded paper slipped from his Paquita-coated note, its edges crumpled. Lyle handed it to Miss Marple as they escorted Marsh to the station. "You've got a knack for this," he said, half admiring, half exasperated. "Merely observation." "Inspector," she replied, unfolding the note. Her eyes scanned the cryptic symbols, a mix of letters and numbers. She'd seen similar codes in Sylvia's diary, and her mind began to piece them together. By dawn, she'd decoded it, an address for a convent just outside St. Mary Mead. With the words, "Sylvia's Refuge," she turned to Lyle, her voice steady. "Inspector, I believe we've found her." The night's events had resolved the immediate threat. Marsh was in custody, his coded note betraying his desperation. But Sylvia was still out there, hidden in a convent, waiting for the moment she could return. Miss Marple clutched the note, her mind already racing to the next step. She would bring Sylvia home, and with her, the truth that would unravel Marsh and Tarrant's scheme once and for all. The village dance continued in the distance, its music a faint echo of triumph. Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles waiting at home. The shadow was lifting, and St. Mary Mead would soon be whole again. Chapter 10. The Trap for Marsh. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silver sheen across the cobblestone paths and thatched roofs. The village, usually tucked into a quiet slumber by this hour, buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill, sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking softly. The plan was in motion, and she felt the familiar tingle of a puzzle nearing its solution, a sensation as comforting to her as the scent of her rose garden. Earlier that day, she and Inspector Lyle had crafted a rumour, delicate as a spider's web, designed to ensnare Mr. Felix Marsh. The whisper spread through Mrs. Bantry's gossip-prone tea circle and the village postmistress's eager ears was that Sylvia Hawthorne had returned to St. Mary Mead, clutching irrefutable proof of Julian Tarrant's embezzlement. The bait was set, and Miss Marple knew Marsh, with his sharp instincts and sharper greed, would bite. The village hall, festooned with paper lanterns for the annual harvest dance, glowed warmly against the autumn dusk. Villagers in their Sunday best twirled to the lively strains of a fiddle, their laughter mingling with the clink of cider glasses. Miss Marple, seated near the punch bowl, her grey eyes sharp behind her spectacles, observed the crowd with the precision of a hawk. Her plain black dress and laced cap blended her into the background, a perfect vantage point for watching human nature unfold. Across the room, Felix Marsh stood out like a wolf among sheep, his tailored suit, a touch too flashy for St. Mary Mead's. Rustic charm clung to his lean frame. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes darted restlessly, betraying the composure of his practiced smile. He was speaking to Amos Holt, the groundskeeper whose broad shoulders hunched as if carrying a secret heavier than his shovel. Their exchange was brief but heated, Marsh's hand slicing the air, Holt's face darkening before he nodded curtly and slipped into the crowd. Miss Marple's needles paused. She had seen that look before, the flicker of panic in a man cornered by his own schemes. Marsh was rattled, and she suspected the rumour had reached him. She sipped her tea, her mind tracing the threads of the mystery. Sylvia's coded diary, the embezzled trust, the singed letter fragment hinting at a secret room. Marsh was the shadow behind Tarrant, the puppeteer pulling strings. Tonight she would cut those strings. "Miss Marple, you're awfully quiet," said Mrs. Dolly Bantry, plopping onto the chair beside her, her cheeks flushed from a spirited poker. "Not planning to dance, are you?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. My dancing days are behind me, Dolly, but I find the sidelines offer a splendid view of the festivities and the people. Mrs. Bantry chuckled, fanning herself with a program. Oh, you and your people watching. I swear, Jane, you see more in a glance than most do in a lifetime. Have you seen that Marsh fellow? He's got the charm of a snake oil salesman, but tonight he looks like he's swallowed a lemon. Has he, now? Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her mind sharpened. Perhaps he's heard something unsettling. Rumours do travel quickly in St. Mary Mead. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, catching the hint. You mean about Sylvia, oh Jane, you clever thing? You've stirred the pot, haven't you? Merely a ripple, dear, Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm. But ripples can unsettle even the deepest waters. As the fiddles struck up a new tune, Miss Marple's gaze followed Marsh as he wove through the crowd, his smile tight, his steps too deliberate. He paused by the refreshment table, where Ellen Ward, the nervous maid, was refilling a tray of scones. Ellen's hands trembled, and when Marsh leaned close, whispering something, her face paled. She shook her head, her eyes darting toward the hall's exit. Miss Marple set her knitting in her basket. Excuse me, Dolly, I believe I'll stretch my legs. She moved with the unhurried grace of an elderly spinster, her steps muffled by the din of laughter and music. Outside, the night air was crisp, scented with wood smoke and fallen leaves. The hall's lanterns cast long shadows, and in one of them she saw Ellen slip out, clutching her shawl. Miss Marple followed, her heart steady but her senses alert. Ellen hurried toward the lane leading to Thornfield Hall, her breath visible. In the cool air, Miss Marple's intuition, honed by years of observing the quiet betrayals of village life, told her Ellen was more than a frightened bystander. The maid's loyalty to Sylvia, her fear of Tarrant, and her secretive meetings suggested she was guarding a piece of the puzzle. But tonight, Marsh's agitation pointed to a bolder move at Thornfield Hall. The estate loomed dark against the starlit sky, its windows like empty eyes. Miss Marple lingered in the shadow of a yew tree, watching as Ellen approached the library's side entrance. The maid hesitated, then glanced around before slipping inside. Moments later, a second figure emerged from the lane marsh, his coat flapping as he moved with purpose. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Rashness, she murmured, is the downfall of the cunning. She crept closer, her steps silent on the dew-damp grass. The library window was ajar, and through it she saw Marsh inside, his flashlight beam darting across bookshelves. Ellen stood frozen, clutching a broom as if it were a shield. Where is it, girl? Marsh's voice was low, edged with menace. I know she's back. The diary, the documents where are they? I don't know what you mean, Ellen stammered, her voice barely audible. Miss Sylvia's not here. You're mistaken. Don't lie to me, Marsh snapped, stepping closer. Tarrant's losing his nerve, and I won't let that chit ruin everything. Hand it over, or you'll regret it. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her shawl. She had anticipated Marsh's desperation, but his boldness surprised her. She glanced toward the lane, where Inspector Lyle's constables were stationed, hidden in the copse as per their plan. The trap was closing, but timing was everything. Inside, Ellen backed toward the bookcase, her eyes wide. I swear I don't have anything. Please, leave me be. Marsh lunged, grabbing her wrist. Ellen gasped, and a small object fell from her pocket, a folded paper, its edges singed. Marsh released her, snatching it up, his eyes gleaming as he unfolded it. "This is it," he muttered. "The code. She's been clever, hasn't she?" Miss Marple's mind raced. The singed fragment from the Infire Sylvia's coded note. Marsh had it now, but he didn't know its full meaning. She had decoded enough with Lyle to know it pointed to Sylvia's hiding place, a convent in the next county. If Marsh deciphered it, Sylvia's safety was at risk. She stepped back, signalling to the constables with a subtle wave of her handkerchief. Shadows moved in the copse, silent and swift. Inside, Marsh was too absorbed to notice, his flashlight illuminating the paper as he traced the cryptic symbols. Ellen, trembling, seized her chance. "You're wrong about Miss Sylvia," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She's smarter. Then she'll see you ruined." Marsh whirled, his face contorted. "You little fool," he began, but a creak from the doorway cut him off. Inspector Lyle stepped in, his lantern casting a stark light across the room, flanked by 2 constables. "Mr. Marsh," Lyle said, his tone calm but unyielding, "I suggest you drop that paper and step away from Miss Ward." Marsh froze, the paper crumpling in his fist. For a moment, his eyes flickered with calculation, then defeat. He dropped the note, raising his hands. "This is a misunderstanding, Inspector." "I was merely—" "Save it for the station," Lyle said, nodding to the constables, who moved to secure Marsh. Ellen sagged against the bookcase, tears streaking her face. Miss Marple entered, her presence quiet but commanding. "Well done." "Ellen," she said softly, placing a hand on the maid's shoulder. "You were very brave." Ellen sniffled, managing a nod. "I just wanted to protect Miss Sylvia." "And you did," Miss Marple said, her eyes warm. She retrieved the crumpled note from the floor, smoothing it carefully. The coded symbols, a mix of letters and numbers, were familiar. She had seen there, like in Sylvia's diary, a cipher that, with Lyle's help, she had partially unravelled. This note, though, was more precise a map to Sylvia's refuge. Lyle joined her, his brow furrowed. "Miss Marple, is that what I think it is?" She nodded, handing him the note. "It confirms Sylvia's hiding place a convent near Ashford. We must move quickly, Inspector. Mr. Marsh's desperation suggests he knows more than he's let." On Marsh, now handcuffed, sneered. "You're wasting your time, old woman. Sylvia's long gone, and you'll find nothing to pin on me." Miss Marple's smile was serene but sharp. "Oh, Mr. Marsh, I find that people who underestimate St. Mary Mead often regretted." As the constables led Marsh away, Lyle turned to Miss Marple. "You were right about the rumour." He couldn't resist checking the library for Sylvia's documents. "But how did you know he'd come tonight?" "Human nature, Inspector," she said, adjusting her shawl. "Mr. Marsh is a man respondens, man who thrives on control. The rumour of Sylvia's return threatened that control. He acted, as I expected, rashly and predictably." Lyle shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll send a man to Ashford at dawn to bring Sylvia back safely." "Good," she said, her eyes on the note. "But we must be discreet. Sylvia's safety depends on it." The village hall was still alive with music as they returned, the dance in full swing. Miss Marple resumed her seat, her knitting in hand, but her mind was far from idle. The note's code was a puzzle she could solve, but it required time Sylvia might not have if Marsh's allies were still at large. Mrs. Bantry sidled up, her curiosity undimmed. "Jane, you vanished. Did something happen, Miss Marple?" Needles clicked steadily, A small matter, Dolly. Nothing to spoil the evening. But her thoughts were on the convent, on Sylvia, and on the final threads of the mystery. Marsh was caught, but Tarrant remained, and the ledger's secrets were yet to be fully exposed. As the fiddles played on, Miss Marple's mind wove the next steps, her heart steady with the certainty of justice. The night deepened, and St. Mary Mead danced on, unaware of the trap that had just sprung in its shadows. For Miss Marple, the dance was far from over. Chapter 11. Sylvia's return. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a soft, silvery veil. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her favourite woolen shawl, stood at her cottage window, her sharp eyes scanning the quiet lane. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew the weight of the day ahead. Sylvia Hawthorne, the missing heiress, was alive. Miss Marple had confirmed it at the secluded convent where Sylvia had hidden, her face pale but resolute, her eyes carrying the strain of weeks in hiding. Now, the task was to bring her back to St. Mary Mead safely and unravel the final threads of the conspiracy that had driven her away. Miss Marple's mind buzzed with the details. Sylvia's fear of her guardian, Julian Tarrant, and his shadowy associate, Felix Marsh, the embezzled trust funds, the coded diary and hidden ledgers, the locket buried by the lake. Each clue had been a stitch in the tapestry of deceit she was carefully unpicking. But today was different. Today, Sylvia would return, and Miss Marple needed to ensure her safety while outmaneuvering two desperate men who had everything to lose. She sipped her tea, the porcelain cup warm against her fingers, and considered her next move. Sylvia had agreed to return, but only if she could stay somewhere safe, away from Thornfield Hall's oppressive walls. Miss Marple had arranged for her to stay with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, whose sprawling manor was both a fortress of gossip and a haven of loyalty. Dolly, with her boundless energy and sharp tongue, would keep Sylvia hidden until the time was right. The clock on the mantel chimed 9, pulling Miss Marple from her thoughts. She set down her cup, adjusted her hat, and picked up her knitting bagger prop as much as a pastime, for it gave her hands something to do while her mind worked. She stepped into the crisp morning, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path, and made her way to the convent to fetch Sylvia. The journey to the convent, tucked in a quiet valley 10 miles from St. Mary Mead, was uneventful but heavy with anticipation. Miss Marple sat in the back of Mr. Pye's old taxi, her eyes tracing the hedgerows as they blurred past. The driver, a wiry man with a penchant for village news, prattled on about the latest rumours: a fox in Mrs. Langley's henhouse, a spat at the butcher's butt. Miss Marple only listened. Her thoughts were with Sylvia, the young woman who had fled her own life to escape a web of greed at the convent. A grey stone building surrounded by ancient yews, Mother Superior greeted Miss Marple with a serene nod. "She's waiting in the garden," the nun said, her voice soft but firm. "She's stronger than she looks, but she's frightened." Miss Marple followed a gravel path to a small garden where Sylvia sat on a wooden bench, her auburn hair catching the weak sunlight. She wore a plain grey dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and her eyes darted toward the gate as Miss Marple approached. "Miss Marple," Sylvia said, standing quickly, her voice a mix of relief and nerves. "You came." "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm but steady. "You're safe now. Mrs. Bantry is expecting us, and we'll sort this out together." Sylvia's lips trembled, but she nodded. "I didn't know who to trust. Julian Torrentry was so kind at first, But when I found the ledgers, he changed. And Marsh, he terrified me. I had to run. Miss Marple patted her arm gently. You did what you had to. Now, let's get you to Dolly's. We'll talk more there. The ride back was quiet, Sylvia staring out the window, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Miss System, Marple sensed the weight of Sylvia's silence, the kind that carried unspoken fears. She didn't press her, knowing the girl would speak when ready. Instead, she let her mind sift through the puzzle, Terrence's charm masking his theft, Marsh's menacing shadow, and Ellen, the nervous maid, who seemed caught in the middle. Ellen's role nagged at her loyalty or fear. Miss Marple suspected. The maid knew more about Marsh's plans than she'd admitted. When they arrived at Mrs. Bantry's manor, a sprawling Georgian house with ivy-clad walls, Dolly greeted them at the door with her usual exuberance. Jane, you old sleuth. And Sylvia, my goodness, you're a sight for sore eyes, she exclaimed, ushering them into a cozy drawing room where a fire crackled. You're safe here, my dear. No one gets past my cook's rolling pin or my gardener's temper. Sylvia managed a faint smile, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Bantry. I didn't know where else to go. Nonsense, Dolly said, waving a hand. Your family now. Tea, or something stronger. Tea, please, Sylvia said, glancing at Miss Marple, who nodded encouragingly as Dolly bustled off to fetch the tray. Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly. Sylvia, I need you to tell me everything you know about Felix Marsh. Nora mentioned he was tied to Victor Crane, but I suspect he's more than a business associate. Sylvia's eyes darkened. Marsh is dangerous. He came to Thornfield Hall last summer, always whispering with Julian. I overheard them once, talking about diverting funds. When I found the ledger in Julian's study, I realized they were stealing from my trust. I told Victor Crane because he was the only one who listened. He said he'd help me prove it, but then Marsh sent me a letter, warning me to stay quiet or I'd regret it. Miss Marple's needles paused. Did you keep the letter, Sylvia? Shook her head. I burned it. I was too scared. That's when I ran to the convent. Victor gave me some documents to hide, proof of their scheme, but I didn't know what to do with them. Where are those documents now? Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but firm. At the convent, in a locked box under my bed. I can get them if no need yet, Miss Marple interrupted. We'll retrieve them when it's safe. For now, you stay here. I have a feeling Marsh and Tarrant are getting desperate. Dolly returned with a tray of tea and scones, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Jane, you're plotting something, aren't you? I can see it in that twinkle of yours. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Just a bit of tidying up, Dolly. Sylvia's return is the first step. Now, I need to speak with Ellen again. She's been guarding secrets, and I think she knows Marsh's next move. Leaving Sylvia with Dolly, Miss Marple walked back to Thornfield Hall, her mind sharp despite the ache in her knees. The estate loomed ahead, its Gothic arches shadowed by the afternoon sun. She found Ellen in the kitchen, polishing silver with a distracted air. The maid jumped when Miss Marple cleared her throat. "Oh, Miss Marple," Ellen gasped, dropping a spoon. "You startled me. I'm sorry, Ellen," Miss Marple said, her tone kind but probing. "I wanted to talk about Sylvia. She's safe now, but I need your help to keep her that way." Ellen's hands trembled. I don't know anything." Miss Marple sat at the kitchen table, her knitting bag beside her. "Ellen, you've been frightened for weeks. I've seen it in your eyes, the way you flinch when Mr. Tarrant's name is mentioned. You hid Sylvia's diary, didn't you? To protect her." Elon's face crumpled, and she nodded. "I found it in her room after she left. I didn't want Mr. Tarrant to get it. He was so angry when she started asking about the trust. And Mr. Marsh, he's worse. I overheard them last night, in the study. They were talking about leaving, burning papers, getting away before anyone found out." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. "Did they say where they were going?" Ellen shook her head. "No, but Mr. Marsh said something about tying up loose ends. I'm scared, miss. What if they hurt Sylvia?" "They won't," Miss Marple said firmly. "Not if we act quickly. Will you help me, Ellen?" The maid hesitated, then nodded, her jaw set. "For Miss Sylvia, I will." Miss Marple returned to the village, her mind racing. Tarrant and Marsh were planning to flee, which meant they knew the net was closing. She needed Inspector Lyle's help too. Catch them in the act. At the police station, a small brick building with a single constable dozing at the desk, Lyle was poring over the decoded diary. "Miss Marple," he greeted, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I was just about to send for you. The diary mentions a final transfer to an account in London. If Tarrant's moving money, he's covering his tracks." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "Ellen just told me Tarrant and Marsh are planning to flee. They're burning documents at Thornfield Hall. We need to act tonight, Inspector. Sylvia's back, and they'll know soon enough." Lyle's eyes widened. "Sylvia's back? Where is she?" "With Mrs. Bantry, safe for now. But we need to catch Tarrant in the act of destroying evidence. Can you station constables at the hall tonight?" Lyle nodded, scribbling a note. "I'll have men at every exit. If they're burning papers, we'll have them for destruction of evidence, at the least." As dusk fell, Miss Marple returned to Dolly's Manor to check biography system on Sylvia. The young heiress was in the drawing room, sipping tea and looking less like a fugitive and more like the poised woman she'd once been. Dolly, ever the hostess, was regaling her with tales of village scandals. But Sylvia's eyes kept drifting to the window, as if expecting Tarrant or Marsh to appear. "Miss Marple," Sylvia said, standing as the older woman entered, "have you found out anything more?" "A little," Miss Marple replied, taking a seat. "Ellen's confirmed that Tarrant and Marsh are planning to destroy evidence tonight. Inspector Lyle is setting a trap at Thornfield Hall, but I need your help, Sylvia. If they see you, it might push them to act rashly, which could help us catch them." Sylvia's face paled, but she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. They stole everything, my home, my trust, my peace. I want them to face justice." Dolly clapped her hands. "That's the spirit. Jane, you're a genius at this. What's the plan?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "We let Tarrant and Marsh think Sylvia's return is imminent, but we keep her here until the trap is sprung. Ellen will tell Tarrant she's heard Sylvia's back in the village, which should spook him into acting tonight. Lyle's men will be waiting." The plan was set. Ellen, with a courage born of loyalty to Sylvia, agreed to drop a hint to Tarrant at dinner. Miss Marple watched from a distance as the maid, pale but determined, served Tarrant in the dining room at Thornfield Hall, through a crack in the curtains. Miss Marple saw Tarrant's face tighten when Ellen mentioned, in a trembling voice, that Miss Sylvia's been seen in the village, sir. Tarrant's fork paused midair, his eyes narrowing. Seen. By whom? Just talk at the tea shop, Sir Ellen said, her hands twisting her apron. They say she's back to settle things. Tarrant dismissed her with a curt nod, but Mr. Marple saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. She slipped away, meeting Lyle near the estate's gate, where two constables waited in the shadows. He's rattled, Miss Marple whispered. He'll act tonight. Lyle nodded, his face grim. EAO system, set under the moonlight. Let's hope so. We move at midnight. The night was cold, the stars sharp in the sky as Miss Marple, Lyle, and the constables crept toward Thornfield Hall. The manor loomed like a sleeping giant, its windows dark except for a faint glow in the study. Miss Marple's heart thudded not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. She'd always found human nature more predictable than surprising. But tonight the stakes felt higher. Inside the study was a scene of quiet chaos. Tarrant stood by the fireplace, tossing papers into the flames, his face slick with sweat. The air smelled of burnt ink and desperation. Lyle signaled the constables, and they burst in, startling Tarrant so badly he dropped a ledger into the fire. It hissed, pages curling to ash. Julian Tarrant, you're under arrest for destruction of evidence and suspected fraud. Lyle barked as a constable pinned Tarrant's arms. Tarrant's eyes darted wildly. You can't prove anything. This is my house. Miss Marple stepped forward, her knitting bag dangling from her arm. Oh, but we can, Mr. Tarrant. The ledgers we've already recovered, Sylvia's diary, the locket by the lake, they all tell a story, and Sylvia herself will finish it. Sylvia, Tarrant's voice cracked. She's gone. Not anymore, Miss Marple said calmly. She's safe, and she's ready to testify. Tarrant's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. As the constables led him out, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the study. A photograph on the desk caught her attention, Sylvia and Tarrant, years ago, smiling. She wondered what had turned him to greed, but such questions rarely had satisfying answers. Back at Dolly's, Sylvia waited, her hands clasped tightly. When Miss Marple entered, she stood, hope and fear battling in her eyes. It's done, Miss Marple said softly. Tarrant's in custody. Marsh is next. Sylvia's breath hitched. Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't know how you did it. Miss Marple smiled. People are much the same everywhere, my dear. Greed makes them careless. Dolly burst in, carrying a tray of sherry glasses, a toast to Sylvia's return and Jane's brilliance. They clinked glasses, the amber liquid glowing in the firelight. Sylvia's eyes shone with tears, but her smile was real. Miss Marple sipped her sherry, her mind already turning to Marsh. The trap for him would be trickier, but she relished the challenge. As the night deepened, St. Mary Mead slept, unaware of the drama unfolding. Miss Marple sat by Dolly's fire, knitting her thoughts, weaving the next steps. Sylvia was safe, Tarrant was caught, but Marsh remained a shadow yet to be banished. She'd be ready. Chapter 12. The confession. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the worn oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking softly. A cup of tea steamed beside her, its fragrance mingling with the scent of lavender from the garden. Her mind, however, was far from the tranquil scene. The pieces of Sylvia Hawthorne's disappearance were falling into place, each clue a stitch in the intricate tapestry of deceit. She was unraveling. Today she would confront Julian Tarrant, the suave guardian of Thornfield Hall. and Amos Holt, the groundskeeper, whose loyalty seemed tethered to more than just duty. The final letter from Sylvia, handed over by the nervous maid, Ellen Ward, lay folded in her handbag, a damning piece of evidence that would tighten the noose around. Tarrant's polished neck. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and glanced at the letter again. Sylvia's neat script detailed Tarrant's threats to silence her if she exposed his embezzlement of her trust fund. The words were laced with fear but also resolve. A young woman determined to reclaim her future. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Greed, she thought, was a predictable vice, but fear could twist even the most steadfast heart. Ellen's confession yesterday that she had hidden Sylvia's diary to protect her had been the key to unlocking Tarrant's motives. But Felix Marsh, Tarrant's shadowy associate, remained a loose thread. Miss Marple suspected he was the true puppeteer. She would need to tread carefully at today's village meeting to expose them both. The clock on the mantel chimed 10, and Miss Marple rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. She tucked the letter into her handbag alongside the monogrammed locket and the ledger from the secret room. Each item a silent witness to the crimes at Thornfield Hall, the village meeting, ostensibly to discuss the restoration of the old mill, would serve as her stage. Sylvia, now safely ensconced at Mrs. Bantry's cottage, had agreed to attend, her presence a catalyst to force the truth into the open. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet determination. Human nature, she mused, was her greatest alliance. Flaws and frailties always betrayed the guilty. The village hall was abuzz when Miss Marple arrived, her modest hat bobbing through the crowd of St. Mary Mead's residents. The air smelled of polished wood and freshly baked scones, a staple of Mrs. Langley's contributions to such gatherings. Villagers clustered in knots, their whispers a low hum about Sylvia's return and the rumours swirling around Tarrant. Miss Marple caught snippets as she passed. Embezzlement, they say. Poor Sylvia, frightened out of her wits, and that Marsh fellow never trusted him. She spotted Inspector Lyle near the front, his broad shoulders stiff in his uniform, his notebook tucked under his arm. He gave her a nod, his expression a mix of respect and exasperation. Lyle had come to value Miss Marple's insights, though he still bristled at her penchant for meddling. Beside him stood Sylvia, her auburn hair pulled back, her face pale but resolute. Nora, her cousin, hovered protectively, her eyes darting toward the door where Tarrant and Holt had just entered. Tarrant's tailored suit and easy smile belied the tension in his jaw, while Holt's weathered face was a mask of stoic indifference, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Miss Marple took a seat near the front, her knitting bag at her feet, and surveyed the room. Ellen Ward lingered by the tea urn, her hands twisting a napkin as she avoided Tarrant's gaze. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, ever the social hub, was chatting animatedly with Mr. Percy Gale, the solicitor, whose mention of Sylvia's trust had first raised Miss Marple's suspicions. The stage was set, the players in place. All that remained was to pull the right thread. The meeting began with Mr. Gale's droning report on the mill's funding, but the villagers' attention was elsewhere, their eyes flickering towards Sylvia and Tarrant. Miss Marple waited, her needles clicking rhythmically, until Gale paused for questions. She raised her hand, her voice clear and unassuming. "Mr. Gale, might we discuss another matter of importance? The Hawthorne Trust, for instance. I believe Miss Sylvia has something to share." A hush fell over the room. Sylvia stood, her hands clasped tightly. I want to thank everyone for their concern," she began, her voice trembling but growing steadier. I was forced to hide because I uncovered something terrible about my guardian. Mr. Tarrant, he's been stealing from my trust fund for years, and when I confronted him, he threatened me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tarrant's smile faltered, his hand tightening on his cane. "That's preposterous," he declared, his voice smooth but edged with panic. "Sylvia, my dear, you've been under strain. These accusations are baseless, are they?" Miss Marple interjected, rising slowly. She reached into her handbag and produced the ledger, its leather cover worn, but its contents damning. This ledger, found in a hidden room at Thornfield Hall, details transactions diverting funds from Sylvia's trust to accounts linked to you, Mr. Tarrant. And this letter, she held up Sylvia's final note, describes your threats to silence her if she exposed you. The room erupted in murmurs. Tarrant's face reddened, his charm crumbling. "This is absurd. That ledger could be forged, and the letter anyone could have written it." Inspector Lyle stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've had the ledger examined, Mr. Tarrant. The handwriting matches your own records, and the bank transfers trace back to accounts you control. Care to explain?" Tarrant's eyes darted to Holt, who shifted uncomfortably. Miss Marple seized the moment, turning to the groundskeeper. "Mr. Holt, you've been loyal to Mr. Tarrant, haven't you? Loyal enough to bury a locket engraved with SH by the lake on his orders to erase any trace of Sylvia's presence." Holt's weathered face paled, his hands clenching. I didn't know what it was for," he stammered. "He said it was just a trinket, that it had caused trouble if found." "Lies," Tarrant snapped, but his voice cracked. The villagers leaned forward, their eyes wide, sensing the unraveling of a man they'd once admired. Miss Marple's gaze softened as she turned to Ellen, who stood frozen by the tea urn. "Ellen, dear, you've carried a heavy burden, haven't you? Hiding Sylvia's diary to protect her, knowing what Mr. Tarrant was capable of. Would you tell us what you heard between him and Mr. Marsh?" Ellen's napkin fell to the floor, her eyes brimming with tears. The room was silent, every ear straining. "I overheard them in the study," she whispered. "Mr. Tarrant and Mr. Marsh. They were arguing about money, Sylvia's money. Mr. Marsh said if Mr. Tarrant didn't pay up, he'd tell everyone about the trust. Mr. Tarrant said he'd make sure Sylvia stayed gone, whatever it took." Crowd gasped again, louder this time. Tarrant staggered back, his cane slipping. "You little fool," he hissed at Ellen, but Lyle was already moving, his hand on Tarrant's shoulder. "That's enough, Mr. Tarrant," Lyle said. "You're coming with us. Fraud and coercion, for starters. We'll see what else the evidence supports." As constables led Tarrant toward the door, he turned, his face a mask of desperation. "It was Marsh," he blurted. "Felix Marsh forced me into it. He had evidence of my debts, threatened to ruin me unless I helped him siphon the trust. I never meant to hurt Sylvia." The villagers buzzed, their shock turning to indignation. Miss Marple remained calm, her eyes narrowing. Tarrant's confession was a start, but Marsh was the shadow behind the scheme. She glanced at Sylvia, who stood tall, her fear replaced by resolve. "Thank you, Ellen," Sylvia said softly. "You kept my diary safe. It helped save me." Ellen nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Miss Sylvia. I was scared, but I wanted to help." Miss Marple patted Ellen's arm. "You did help, dear, more than you know." She turned to Lyle. "Inspector, I believe Mr. Marsh's role needs further scrutiny. That threatening letter sent to my cottage came from his typewriter, and the coded note he dropped suggests he knew Sylvia's hiding place. I'd wager he's the architect of this entire affair." Lyle nodded grimly. "We're bringing Marsh in tomorrow. With Tarrant's testimony and the evidence you've gathered, Miss Marple will have enough to charge him." The meeting dissolved into chaos, villagers clustering around Sylvia and Nora, offering support and outrage in equal measure. Mrs. Bantry bustled over, her face flushed with excitement. "Jane, you've done it again. How you see through these scoundrels, I'll never know." Miss Marple smiled modestly, gathering her knitting. "People are much the same, Dolly. Greed and fear make them careless, and a careful eye can spot the rest." As the crowd dispersed, Sylvia approached, her eyes shining. "Miss Marple, I don't know how to thank you. You brought me back, made it safe for me to come home." Miss Marple took her hand, her grip warm and steady. "You were brave, Sylvia. You held on to the truth, and that's what matters. Now, let's ensure Mr. Marsh faces his reckoning." Sylvia nodded, a spark of determination in her gaze. "I'll be there at Thornfield Hall when you confront him. I want to see this through." Miss Marple's smile widened. "I wouldn't expect anything less, my dear." That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the locket and ledger on the table before her. The village was abuzz with Tarrant's arrest, but her mind was on the gathering she'd planned at Thornfield Hall. Marsh was cunning, his influence subtle but pervasive. She suspected he'd orchestrated the embezzlement from the shadows, using Tarrant as a pawn. The coded note, the threatening letter, the fire at Crane's Inn all pointed to a man desperate to cover his tracks. But desperation, Miss Marple knew, bred mistakes. She opened Sylvia's diary, its coded entries now deciphered. By Lyle, one passage caught her eye. Felix promised wealth, but his eyes held only hunger. Sylvia had seen through Marsh's charm, just as Miss Marple had seen through Tarrant's. Tomorrow she would lay out the evidence, locket, ledger, letters, and diary, and let Marsh's own greed betray him. Outside, the wind rustled through. The roses and Miss Marple's needles resumed their steady rhythm. The mystery was nearly solved, but the final act required precision. She thought of Sylvia, safe at last, and Nora, her loyal cousin, ready to rebuild their family's legacy. St. Mary Mead would heal, as it always did, but not without one last confrontation to ensure justice. She closed the diary, her mind clear. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "we'll unravel the rest." Chapter 13. The final unraveling. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the polished oak floors of Thornfield Hall's grand drawing room. Dust motes danced in the slanting light, lending an ethereal glow to the heavy velvet drapes, and the portraits of stern-faced hawthorns glaring down from the walls. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, adjusted her spectacles and smoothed her lavender skirt. Her knitting needles lay idle in her lap, a rare occurrence, for today her full attention was required. The room buzzed with a tense anticipation, as if the very air held its breath. Around her, the key players in Sylvia Hawthorne's mystery were assembled, each a piece in the intricate puzzle she had spent weeks unraveling. Sylvia herself, pale but resolute, stood near the window, her auburn hair catching the light like a halo. Beside her, Nora, her cousin, fidgeted with a lace handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Mr. Julian Tarrant, his once suave demeanour, frayed, sat rigidly on a settee, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on his knee. Mr. Felix Marsh, the shadowy figure whose name had loomed over the case like a storm cloud, leaned against a bookcase, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Inspector Lyle, solid and dependable in his tweed suit, stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, flanked by two constables whose presence underscored the gravity of the moment. Miss Marple cleared her throat, a delicate sound that nonetheless commanded attention. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of inevitability. "We are gathered here to lay bare the truth of Sylvia Hawthorne's disappearance, truth that has been obscured by greed, fear, and deception. But truth, like a stubborn weed, always finds a way to the surface." Sylvia's gaze flickered toward Miss Marple, a mix of gratitude and apprehension in her green eyes. Tarrant's drumming fingers stilled, and Marsh's posture stiffened, though his face remained a mask of calculated indifference. Miss Marple held up the silver locket, its engraved essay glinting in the firelight. "This locket," she said, "was the first thread I pulled. Found buried by the lake, it suggested Sylvia was not simply gone, but hidden perhaps by her own choice, perhaps not. It led me to other threads, a coded diary, a ledger of financial misdeeds, and letters revealing a blackmail scheme. Each piece told a story, and together they point to a singular truth." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The room was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Nora's handkerchief twisted tighter in her hands. "Let us begin with the ledger," Miss Marple continued, gesturing to a leather-bound book on the table beside her. "Found in a locked shed on this estate, it details transactions, siphoning funds from the Hawthorne Trust Sylvia's inheritance. The numbers are meticulous, but they lie. They show money vanishing into accounts that do not exist, funneled through shell companies. Mr. Tarrant, as Sylvia's guardian, you had access to the trust. You signed the documents. But signatures alone do not a scheme make." Tarrant's face flushed, his jaw tightening. "I've admitted to mismanaging funds," he said, his voice clipped. "But I never harmed Sylvia. I swear it." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, held his. "Mismanagement is a gentle word for theft, Mr. Tarrant, but you did not act alone, did you?" Her gaze shifted to Marsh, who met it with a faint smirk, as if daring her to continue. "The diary," she said, lifting the small, worn notebook. "Sylvia's words, coded to protect her secrets, spoke of a secret fund and a name, Victor Crane. Sylvia, you discovered Mr. Tarrant's theft, didn't you? And you turned to Mr. Crane, your suitor, for help." Sylvia nodded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I found discrepancies in the trust accounts. Julie and Mr. Tarrant brushed off my questions, but I kept digging. Victor had connections, people who could verify the accounts. He promised to help me gather proof." "And so you did," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. "But that proof came at a cost. You wrote letters to Victor, hidden in the shed, outlining a plan to expose Mr. Tarrant. Those letters also mentioned Crane's proof documents you entrusted to him. But someone else knew of your plan, didn't they, Mr. Marsh?" Marsh's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "You're weaving quite a tale, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but edged. "But you've no evidence tying me to anything." "Oh, but I do," Miss Marple replied, her voice serene yet unyielding. She produced a singed fragment of paper, the one found in the village postbox after the fire at Crane's Inn. "This mentions Thornfield's secret room, where we found a safe containing documents that confirm Mr. Tarrant's embezzlement. But the safe also held something else, a letter from you, Mr. Marsh, demanding a cut of the stolen funds. You weren't just aware of the scheme. You orchestrated it. The room stirred. Nora gasped, and Tarrant's head snapped toward Marsh, his eyes blazing. You said no one would find out. Tarrant spat, his composure cracking. You promised quiet, Julian, Marsh snapped, his voice low and dangerous. Don't make this worse. Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing them. Mr. Marsh, you saw an opportunity in Sylvia's trust. A young heiress, a distracted guardian, a fortune ripe for the taking. You pressured Mr. Tarrant, didn't you? Threatened to expose his smaller indiscretions unless he played your game. But Sylvia was cleverer than you anticipated. She began to suspect, and when she confided in Victor Crane, you panicked. Marsh's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his silence a confession in itself. Sylvia, Miss Marple continued, turning to the young woman. You fled to a convent, fearing for your life after Mr. Marsh sent you threats. The locket, buried by the lake, was a message, a clue. You were still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. You left it for someone to find, didn't you? Sylvia's eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was clear. I was terrified. Felix, Mr. Marsh sent a letter saying if I exposed them, I'd disappear for good. I hid the locket, hoping someone would understand. I didn't know who to trust, except Victor. And Ellen Ward, Miss Marple added, her gaze softening as she looked toward the door, where Ellen stood, pale and silent, having slipped in unnoticed. Ellen, you knew more than you let on. You hid Sylvia's diary, protected her secrets, even at great risk. Why? Ellen's lips trembled, but she squared her shoulders. Miss Sylvia was kind to me. When I heard Mr. Tarrant and Mr. Marsh talking about the money, I knew she was in danger. I couldn't let them hurt her. The room seemed to exhale, the weight of Ellen's loyalty settling over them. Sylvia crossed to her, taking her hands. Thank you, Ellen, she whispered. You kept me safe. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet approval. But the final piece, she said, is Mr. Marsh's role as the puppeteer. You didn't just threaten Sylvia, did you? You sent a letter to my cottage, warning me to stop my inquiries. A typewriter's unique signature betrayed you, Mr. Marsh. Inspector Lyle confirmed it. Lyle stepped forward, holding the threatening letter. The typeface matches one found in your office, Marsh. Care to explain? Marsh's mask finally cracked, his face twisting with anger. You think you've won, old woman, he snarled. You've got nothing but papers and guesses. Sylvia's back fine, but you can't prove I did more than nudge Tarrant along. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with the quiet triumph of one who has seen human nature laid bare. Oh, but I can, Mr. Marsh. You see, I understand people, how they act when cornered, how they betray themselves. You blackmailed Mr. Tarrant, coerced him into stealing from the trust, and when Sylvia threatened to expose you, you made her fear for her life. You didn't just nudge, you pulled the strings. Sylvia stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. You sent me that letter, Felix. You said I'd end up like my parents dead in an accident if I didn't stay silent. I ran because of you. The room erupted. Tarrant leaped to his feet, pointing at Marsh. He made me do it. He said he'd ruin me, expose my debts. I never wanted to hurt Sylvia enough, Lyle barked, nodding to the constables. They moved toward Marsh, who backed against the bookcase, his hands raised. You can't arrest me on her word." Marsh shouted, his voice rising with desperation. "She's lying." But Sylvia held up a folded letter, her hands steady now. "This is the letter you sent me, Felix. I kept it, even in hiding. It's your handwriting, your threats." Lyle took the letter, scanning it quickly before turning to Marsh. "Felix Marsh, you're under arrest for blackmail, fraud, and coercion. Anything you say can and will be used against you." As the constables cuffed Marsh, he glared at Miss Marple, his eyes burning with defiance. "You think you're clever, don't you? Meddling where you don't belong." Miss Marple met his gaze unruffled. "I find, Mr. Marsh, that truth has a way of belonging everywhere. You underestimated Sylvia's courage, Ellen's loyalty, and, perhaps, my own persistence." Sylvia crossed to Miss Marple, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I'd never come home." Miss Marple took her hand, her touch warm and steady. "You were always coming home, my dear. It was only a matter of time." Nora joined them, embracing Sylvia tightly, their bond a quiet testament to resilience. The constables led Marsh out, his protests fading as the heavy oak doors closed behind him. Tarrant, defeated, slumped back onto the settee, awaiting his own fate. Inspector Lyle approached Miss Marple, his notebook tucked away. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, a rare smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "I don't know how you see what we miss." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "People are much the same, Inspector. Whether in St. Mary Mead or London, they fear, they scheme, they love, and in their actions they tell their stories. One need only listen." As the room emptied, Sylvia and Nora lingered, their voices soft as they spoke of rebuilding Thornfield Hall. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly, a familiar rhythm in the now quiet room. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Thornfield Hall in a warm, forgiving light. The mystery was solved, the guilty exposed, and St. Mary Mead, for now, was at peace. Chapter 14. A new dawn. The morning sun cast a golden sheen over St. Mary Mead, its rays slipping through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. The village, so recently stirred by the scandal of Sylvia Hawthorne's disappearance and the unmasking of Julian Tarrant and Felix Marsh's schemes, seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The air was crisp, scented with late summer roses and the promise of a quieter season. Miss Marple sat in her armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, a soft grey shawl taking shape in her lap. Her eyes, sharp as ever, drifted to the window where children chased each other across the green, their laughter a melody of normalcy restored. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. Sylvia, now safe and reunited with her cousin Nora, had returned to Thornfield Hall, her ancestral home, no longer a place of secrets but one of hope. The trust funds, pilfered by Tarrant and Marsh, were being meticulously restored under Inspector Lyle's oversight, with the help of the diligent solicitor, Mr. Percy Gale. The village buzzed with plans for the hall's transformation into a community centre, beacon of unity after division. But for Miss Marple, the true resolution lay not in ledgers or arrests, but in the mending of human bonds strained by fear and greed. She set her knitting aside and rose, smoothing her lavender skirt. Today was no ordinary day. She had invited the village to her cottage for tea, a gathering to mark the end of the ordeal and the beginning of something new. The table was already set with her best bone china, a delicate pattern of forget-me-nots, and a spread of scones, clotted cream, and strawberry jam prepared by her loyal housekeeper, Mrs. Langley. A Victoria sponge, dusted with icing sugar, sat proudly at the centre, a nod to celebration, as the clock struck 3. The first guests arrived. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her cheeks flushed with excitement, bustled in, her hat slightly askew. "Jane, my dear, you've outdone yourself," she exclaimed, eyeing the table. "After all this business with Sylvia, I dare say we need a bit of cheer." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "A cup of tea and a kind word can mend many. Things, Dolly, do come in." Behind Mrs. Bantry came Sylvia and Nora, arm in arm, their resemblance striking now that Sylvia's pallor had given way to a healthy glow. Sylvia's auburn hair was pinned elegantly, and her green eyes held a spark of determination. Nora, ever the protective cousin, wore a practical tweed suit, her expression softening as she greeted Miss Marple. "Thank you, Miss Marple," Sylvia said, her voice steady but warm. "Without you, I'd still be hiding, and Thornfield would be lost." "Nonsense, my dear," Miss Marple replied, patting Sylvia's hand. "You had the courage to gather evidence, and Nora the loyalty to stand by you. I merely noticed a few things." Nora laughed softly. "Noticed? You unravelled a tapestry of lies with nothing but a scarf and a locket." The room filled quickly. Mr. Percy Gale arrived, his briefcase replaced by a rare smile, followed by Inspector Lyle, who looked almost relaxed in a tweed jacket rather than his usual stern uniform. Ellen Ward, the nervous maid who had played her part in protecting Sylvia's secrets, entered hesitantly, her eyes darting to Mrs. Langley. The housekeeper, stern but fair, gave her a nod, a silent gesture of forgiveness for Ellen's earlier silence as the guests settled with teacups in hand. The conversation turned to Thornfield Hall. Sylvia stood, her presence commanding the cosy room. "Nora and I have decided," she began, "to turn Thornfield into a place for the village. A library, a meeting hall, perhaps even a schoolroom for the children. The trust funds, now secure, will make it possible." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. "Marvellous, a place for us all to come together. St. Mary Mead could use a bit of that." Inspector Lyle cleared his throat. "I've spoken with the bank, Miss Hawthorne. The funds are being transferred back as we speak. Tarrant and Marsh won't see the light of day for some time, thanks to the evidence you and Miss Marple provided." Sylvia's smile faltered briefly, a shadow crossing her face. "I still can't believe Julian thought he could get away with it, and Marsh's threats were so cold." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed Sylvia's fleeting discomfort. "Fear makes people do desperate things, my dear. But it's courage that undoes them. You faced both, and here you are." The room fell quiet, the weight of Sylvia's ordeal lingering. Then Ellen spoke, her voice small but clear. "I'm sorry, Miss Hawthorne. I should have told someone sooner about the diary, about what I overheard. I was scared." Sylvia crossed the room and took Ellen's hands. "You kept my diary safe, Ellen. That gave Miss Marple and Inspector Lyle what they needed. You're part of why I'm here." Mrs. Langley, who had been hovering near the tea tray, stepped forward. "Ellen, you were foolish, but your heart was in the right place. Let's put it behind us." Ellen's eyes brimmed with tears, and she nodded, a weight visibly lifting. Miss Marple watched, her heart warmed by the exchange. Human nature, she thought, was a curious thing capable of such error, yet such redemption as the afternoon wore on. The conversation lightened. Mr. Gale shared plans for a legal aid clinic at the new community centre, offering free advice to villagers. "It's only right," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "that we use this chance to do some good." Nora, ever practical, added, "We'll need volunteers. Carpenters, painters, even gardeners to restore the grounds. Thornfield's been neglected too long." "I'll help with the roses," Mrs. Bantry declared. "Arthur's hopeless with pruning, but I have a knack for it." Laughter filled the room, and Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting resumed. She listened as the villagers wove plans, their voices a tapestry of hope. Outside, the children's laughter grew louder, and she glanced through the window to see young Tommy Weaver, the boy who'd been attacked near Thornfield's lake, chasing his sister with a stick, both grinning. The village was healing, stitch by stitch, as the sun dipped lower. Casting long shadows across the cottage, Sylvia approached Miss Marple, a small parcel in her hands. "This is for you," she said, handing it over, "a thank you." Miss Marple unwrapped the parcel to find a delicate silver brooch, shaped like a rose, its petals catching the light. "Oh, Sylvia, it's lovely," she said, pinning it to her cardigan. "But you needn't have." "I wanted to," Sylvia replied. "You saw what no one else did. You gave me back my home, my future." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "I only saw what was there, my dear. People are like books sometimes, you just need to read between the lines." The guests began to depart, their spirits high. Mrs. Bantry promised to organize a gardening committee, while Inspector Lyle tipped his hat, murmuring about paperwork awaiting him. Sylvia and Nora lingered, helping Mrs. Langley clear the table, their laughter mingling with the clink of china. As the last guest left, Miss Marple settled by her fire, the brooch glinting on her cardigan. She picked up her knitting, the grey shawl nearly complete. Her thoughts wandered to the Kay Sylvia's scarf, the locket, the diary, the secret room. Each clue had been a thread, and she had merely followed them, her understanding of human nature her guide. Fear had driven Tarrant and Marsh, greed had blinded them. But courage Sylvia's, Nora's, even Ellen's, had prevailed. She glanced out the window once more. The children had gone, the green now quiet under the fading light. St. Mary Mead was itself again, its rhythm restored. No mysteries lingered on the horizon, no whispers of scandal in the tea shop. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. For now, the village was whole, and that was enough. But as she knit, a faint sound caught her ear, a rustle in the garden, perhaps a cat or a late visitor. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. The village might be tranquil, but human nature was never still. She chuckled to herself, resuming her knitting. If another mystery arose, she would be ready, her sharp mind and quiet observation ever at the ready. The fire crackled, and Miss Marple's cottage glowed with warmth, a haven in the heart of St. Mary Mead. The rose brooch shone, a reminder of a case well solved, and a village made whole again.